and welcome to Deep Dive with Jamie Stein, where we take a deep dive look at all things reality TV, pop culture, and the world at large. I'm an intuitive and an empath, which means I pick up on the thoughts, feelings, and energy percolating in other people and the world around me. I believe there is meaning waiting to be found at every turn if you're willing to see it. So join me as we dismantle everything from trash TV to high spiritual concepts and learn more about ourselves, each other, and how we're all connected. Hey everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Deep Dive with Jamie Stein. Taking a deep breath because we are getting into it today. We're at a very, very big moment in our nation and in our nation's history. I actually think we're in a bit of a reckoning with a pattern that got originated with the founding of our nation, but I'm sure we'll get there in due time. But yes, we are in the midst of a really big moment that's been having a very big impact, I think, on almost all of us. And I am, of course, talking about the assassination and the murder of Charlie Kirk. And what it perhaps wants to reveal about what's going on with us as a nation, as a collective, and as individuals. And I just want to say a couple things up top because I know this is such a divisive issue. I know that it's a deeply sensitive issue for people on all sides. I know it can be a really triggering issue for people. So it feels really important just to kind of frame this conversation, my intention with it, my guest's intention with it. I am going to issue a trigger warning that is very sincere at the end of this little intro. But before I do that, like I said, I just kind of want to frame this. And, first and foremost, I want to say I really, really, really debated whether I was going to talk about this or not because of all the reasons that I just mentioned. Obviously, when it comes to politics, anything political, it is deeply sensitive for people. And I find it can be challenging for a lot of people to hang out in the intention of peeling back the immediate, I don't know if superficial is the right word because these are issues of depth and consequence, but like the outermost layers of the politics of it all and the partisanship and the division of the partisanship, and to go to sort of what we might call the deeper invitation or the deeper energies or the archetypal conversation we might be being invited into here. Instead, people, like I said, they can get really reactive. It can be very triggering. And I just didn't really know, quite honestly, if I wanted to open up that can of worms on this podcast. Ultimately, obviously, I've decided to do this, and I'm going to say why. First of all, like the real moment for me came through actually just hearing from a client. I had checked in with a client who I'm working with. We communicate through Slack and, just asked her how she was doing. And this is an incredibly sweet young woman. Actually, she's gay. She's very liberal. But in her check-in, she said to me, this was very close to Charlie Kirk's assassination. And she just said, I posted something on Instagram simply saying that, I felt like expressing empathy and sympathy for his wife and kids that he left behind. And apparently because of that one post, she literally had friends just block her. Without even explaining it, they just blocked her. She said very little about this, but I could feel, just from what she was communicating, I could feel her hurt. I could feel her confusion. I could feel her disappointment. I could feel her heartbreak. It moved me tremendously. And I know she's not alone with that. I know a lot of people are really feeling this. And I want to say, myself included, I want to start by really owning that. Like, this has been devastating for me. Like, it's been devastating for me. And I think in the way that it's been devastating for a lot of people. One, I want to say it is devastating to me that Charlie Kirk was killed. And I really want to say that. And, to me, I want to say it goes without saying, but I guess it shouldn't go without saying. I'll just speak from my experience watching him get killed. It was just devastating, devastating for him, devastating for us as a nation, like that this is what it's come to. Like, we're all living in this climate. And that in and of itself was devastating. But then also seeing what is going on in the aftermath, seeing the way that I'm speaking in hyperbole right now, but we're all just taking each other out. We're wiping each other out. We're wiping out each other's humanity. I actually have gotten to the point where I actually will not read the comments anymore on any posts, because it's just when I see people making assumptions about each other, I see people immediately pointing fingers at each other, not even knowing who each other is. These are strangers on the internet just pointing fingers, leveraging blame, being hateful, again, wiping out each other's humanity. It honestly breaks my heart. And just like for so many people in the nation right now, and I'm sure so many people listening to this, these past few weeks for me have been deeply painful, deeply painful. And so I think taking in, my client's words, feeling my own pain over this experience, feeling the nation's pain over this experience, I just got really clear that it just felt right to hold space for this moment, to not bypass it. There was just something in my body saying, I can't go and talk about Tamara Judge and Gretchen Rossi right now. Although, it's all connected, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But, it's like I just couldn't imagine going back into reality TV without first kind of dipping our toes in these waters. And my intention is really to be one of the people who's creating a deeper space to unpack this on a deeper level than just partisanship and politics. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that, just because I did just mention the housewives, honestly, part of why I also felt called to do this is because for those of you who listened to the last episode about Orange County and Katie, we literally talked about everything that's playing out in the nation right now. We literally talked about last episode. So go back and re-listen, or if you haven't listened to it, go and listen to it, because that second half, we literally talked about how what is going on in Orange County is a reflection of what's going on collectively in our nation, specifically in politics. And like this idea of who is the villain, and this idea of everyone pointing a finger at everyone else and being totally blind to the way in which they're doing the very thing that they're accusing others of doing. So when I took in how on track the thematic patterns of that episode were and how directly it relates to what we're watching play out right now, this to me just felt like a part 2 to that episode. And so that's why I'm having my guest who was with me last time be on this time. I'm going to bring her out in a moment. Having said all that, I'm aware it is impossible for me to have, and my guest, Molly, to have an archetypal conversation about these issues without talking about our personal viewpoint as an entry point in. So even just to take this off Charlie Kirk for a moment, to take this off politics, just this is what I do with reality TV, right? It's this idea that because this is ultimately a spiritual podcast, it's this idea that we're in this big waking dream of life, right? And everything that shows up in our lives has meaning. Everything that shows up in our lives is a possible invitation into our deeper self-actualization if we choose to work with it that way. And, just like in a dream or like in a movie, everything we dream about, it's like a symbol, right? And we can interpret the symbol for deeper information about what our psyche is revealing to us about what's going on in our lives so that we can interface with it more meaningfully. And like I said, sort of step into the intended soul journey that's meant for us. And so that's why I take a look at reality TV in this way. It's the idea that everything, we're in these lives as individuals, but we're also in these lives as a collective. Collective town, collective family, collective nation, collective humanity. There's different levels to the collective, but we're in various collectives. And so, yes, we're in our individual lives with our individual symbols and our individual patterns, but the idea is that what plays out in the public consciousness, whether that's current events, politics, or pop culture, yes, we can look at it just at the level of pop culture, but we can also look at it as this is part of the waking dream of the collective. And what are we being invited to look at with something like reality TV? What is it revealing to us as a collective and as individuals? Yes, we can acknowledge what it is on the surface. And if we can get past our immediate reaction to the surface events, if we can, yes, hold space for our triggers, witness our triggers, acknowledge our triggers, but then get out of the triggers way and say, okay, what's here on a deeper level? What is this bringing up in me so that I can use it as a sacred mirror? And in that way, we're all kind of co-creating a deeper conversation about where this takes us. That's when we engage with things on a more meaningful level. So like with reality TV, it's like, yeah, I'm Jamie Stein. I'm a human being. I have my immediate hits. I have my ways I see things. There are people I like. There are people I dislike. But like, let's get into it. Let's hold space for the person on TV's humanity. Let's hold space for my humanity. And sort of let's look at what's here. And that's why I love having these conversations because, someone like Molly might see Tamara Judge one way and I might see Tamara Judge another way. And we get to look at that and then we get to sort of track it to the deeper levels and we get to hold this question. What is it that she's representing to us and for us? What are we sensing in her if we can get out of our own ways for a moment to get curious about where someone like Tamara comes from, to get curious about what might be going on in her on a deeper level, to be curious about our own responses, well, then we're engaging in the archetypal conversation. We're taking this to a deeper level and we're initiating a process where we're not just getting stuck in our own loops and we're instead connecting with one another in our humanity. Now, that doesn't mean at the end of the day, I'm going to end up liking Tamara on a personality level. It doesn't mean at the end of the day, Molly's going to end up liking Tamara on a personality level. It just means we're willing to hold space for each other's humanity in an attempt to get someplace deeper within ourselves. And even if we continue not to like each other on a personality level, we can at least connect in that humanity and be grateful to each other for what we've taught one another on our respective journeys. So it is just this idea that we're all human at the end of the day. And again, just to keep this to reality TV for a moment, because it's a little less charged, we're all humans, and we all have the good, the bad, and the ugly inside of us. That's the gig. We're meant, we're all little archetypes in our own lives because we're meant to master something in these lifetimes. So we're meant to work with our strengths, our weaknesses, our light, and our shadow for the sake of deepening consciousness over the course of this lifetime and many lifetimes. So that's what I'm doing here, you guys. That's what I'm doing with this podcast. And so when I bring someone like Charlie Kirk in and bring in Charlie Kirk's murder and then bring in everything that's happening in the wake of his murder, yes, I am going to get into my political point of view because there's no way else for me to do this. There's no way else for Molly to do this. I have to talk about what I see, hear, and feel and what it brings up in me. But I want to be really clear here. This isn't the Jamie Stein political podcast. So this isn't about me saying I'm right, you're wrong. In fact, it's the opposite of that. And in fact, I think that's a huge problem with what's going on in this nation. I actually think it's a huge part of what I found difficult with Charlie Kirk. I'm right, you're wrong, my way or the highway. That's not the point of why I'm exploring this. I don't give a shit if you guys agree with my take or not. That's not the point of this. I cannot stress this enough. And so let me just sort of frame this just to get this out of the way, you guys. The context in which this podcast is coming through, the context in which this content is coming through. Yes, I am left-leaning. I vote Democratic. As I said in last episode, I'm a very reluctant participant in our political system because I think it's fundamentally broken. I'm a reluctant participant in the two-party political system. I think those that are in control and power want to be in control and power. I think it works for them when we are divided as a nation. But yes, I vote left. That is true because that is more aligned with my personal values. And so, if you need to know about those, I believe in equal rights. I believe in creating, a home for those in need, like immigrants who are coming here to start better lives. I believe in, like I said, I believe in people's right to live lives they want to live, including women's reproductive rights. I think everyone should have access to free healthcare. I think the rich should be taxed. These are just things I believe in. So I vote Democratic because it's more aligned with my personal views. Okay. That said, you guys, I also want you to know it does not mean I am some blind follower of the left. And in fact, I am not. I spoke to this last episode. I am a very reluctant member of the left. The left has its own fucking deep, dark shadow, its own hypocrisy. I am sure we'll get into some of that today. I don't trust the right or the left implicitly. I'm a critical thinker. I'm an independent thinker. And I hate that I even need to say any of this, but it's just like, this is what we've arrived at. If you say anything about anything political, people start to make all these assumptions about you. Oh, you're woke, you're a virtue signaler, you're just saying this because of this, that, and the other. I just want to be really clear about the framework I'm coming into. I'm a guy who leans left because those are my values, but I'm highly critical of both sides of the system. Period. The end. Now, having said that, when it comes to Charlie Kirk, just to give you a preview of where this is going, yes, he's a human being. He was a human being. And just like any other human being, to my mind, Charlie Kirk, there was the good, the bad, and the ugly. So when I look at Charlie Kirk, and I'm just going to give a one-sentence snapshot right now so people are prepared, and then I'm going to give my trigger warning, I personally saw him as a guy with huge blind spots. Like huge fucking blind spots. Think he was very powerful, which is why we're in this moment with our nation. Charlie Kirk and his murder has catalyzed something so deep in this nation. And just like I say, I always think, everything that happens in the field of the person that we're talking about, for me, is information about that person and who they are and their soul and their potential and who they are possibly here to be in this lifetime. With Charlie Kirk, I just keep hearing the word catalyst. Catalyst. He's a catalyzer. And I do believe there was some sacred relationship between, what we might call Christ consciousness, true Christian values. I don't know that I really believe he embodied true Christian values, but true Christian values. I believe there was some potential sacred relationship to like this nation and what it truly means to be an American. Again, I think he was a powerful guy, a catalyst. And I think he had huge fucking blind spots, huge double standards, and was absolutely guilty of doing all the things that he was accusing the other side of doing. We will get into it. And I think it's important. Again, this isn't about a partisan podcast where I'm politically asserting my opinion. That's not why I'm exploring this. I'm exploring this because I think there's something important archetypally here to explore in him that is now getting revealed in our nation on both sides. But the only way for me to explore this is for me to talk about how I experienced Charlie Kirk. So again, I think we open this up in our conversation about Orange County and the women all pointing fingers at each other for doing the very thing that they're actually doing. And I think Charlie Kirk is continuing this conversation. So I'm laying this framework to now issue my very sincere trigger warning. And I'm going to issue it for people on both sides, one for the right and one for the left. The right, I'm going to start with you. I just stated it very clearly. I have major issues with Charlie Kirk, major blind spots. If that is going to be triggering for you, if you are someone who believes that Charlie Kirk was nothing but the embodiment of what America stands for and the embodiment of civil disagreement and this, that, and the other, if that's what you believe, great. If it triggers you to hear someone else have a differing opinion, do not listen to this podcast. I really mean it. If you cannot tolerate that, and if it's going to get you angry, and if you're going to then feel a need to like lecture me about why I'm wrong and this, that, and the other, don't listen to this because it's not the place for you. And I mean that sincerely. Conversely, to the left, if you are someone who just wants to dismiss Charlie Kirk as a monster and we don't mourn monsters, and it's going to be triggering for you to hold space for his humanity and the places where he might have been a really powerful individual, if that's upsetting to you to not vilify him and wipe him out, don't listen to this podcast. It's just as simple as that. I really think that's it. I think the last thing I know I've said a lot already, but you guys, my concluding statement, just to wrap this all up, I cannot stress this enough. This is literally just a space to look at this from a deeper level. And just like with reality TV, we do not have to see it that same way. I say this all the time. I'm going to reiterate it now, and I hope you can hear it in like a new, clearer way. I never claim that the way I see things is the way they are. I never claim there is just one truth. There isn't. That's the beauty of life itself. It's the beauty of America. There are many threads of truth. There are differing perspectives. It's not ultimately about one perspective is the supreme truth and it trumps all. It's how do we honor all the many different perspectives at once? That is the multifaceted nature of life. It's the multidimensionality of life. So when I explore whatever comes through in these podcasts, and by the way, even within me, I'm just exploring one or two threads that come through me. I often have warring perspectives on the same topic. I can't get into all of it in one episode. I probably already do too much as it is in each of these episodes. So the point that I'm making is I don't need you to agree with how I see things. I don't need you to agree with how Molly sees things. I actually don't care if you agree with me or not. The point is we're just having a conversation to invite you to reflect on where this takes you and for you to consider how you see things, where you might be getting triggered, and how this might be a mirror or an invitation for you. And in doing so, I am creating a larger field where hopefully we can all drop underneath this. This conversation is going to mean different things to different people, and it's going to take different people to different places. And that's the intention. And that's the beauty of it. Okay. I think I've said it all as far as framing this. It's unfortunate that I even have to frame it like this. And I'll also say it's, again, information about Charlie Kirk and his potential power. It's interesting to me that there's something happening where I'm feeling called to be clearer about what I'm doing here. So that's just interesting information, clarifying, and then when I say that, it's like, are we in a moment where we're actually clarifying who we are as a nation? Because I think that's kind of part of what's coming up right now. Like, truly, what does it actually mean to be an American? Okay, I've said a lot. Let me officially bring in my frequent collaborator at this point. Like I said, she was with me last time where we opened up this whole can of worms unknowingly, unwittingly, in our last conversation about Katie on Orange County. Welcome back to the deep dive, Molly Durand. Hi, Molly.
Hi. Thank you for that. The very first thing you said brought tears to my eyes because having a space online where we're going to unpack people's humanity rather than dismantle it is a revolutionary act at this point. And that made me sad. And I woke up this morning, and I'm just going to be honest here. I woke up this morning to the news of a friend of mine who just passed. He was a middle-aged white male, and the way that he died is really tragic. And it's not the first man that I know of his age group in the last couple months that have died this way. And I think it's relevant to what we're talking about because I've watched since when you asked me to do this, I had nothing but resistance. We tried to do it last week. I couldn't. I have nothing but fear around what it represents to so many people. So I really needed what you just said just to set the intention of how we're going to speak about it and how it's going to be a different conversation than what you're used to seeing, maybe or not, depending on what you're into. But I do think it's an important one. And I hope that both sides, and I think of the two-party system now almost as in four. You have a left, and then you have a left extremist, and then you have a right, and then you have a right extremist. And we're starting to break off into these sects of different areas of which people are trying to find their home. Everyone is trying to find their home where they belong, their tribal nature, and all of that is coming out. And one of the things that Charlie, when you talked about doing this weeks ago, so I have been watching him, and I was raised in a town called Wheaton, Illinois, which is about 30 miles west of Chicago. It's a Chicago suburb. And it's not too far away from Arlington Heights, where Charlie Kirk grew up. And Wheaton, Illinois is where Billy Graham has Wheaton College. And it is a very Christian town. I grew up Irish Catholic, Democrat, like blue collar Democrat. We have people in our family who came from nothing, who became Democratic politicians. And I always associated the Democratic Party as being like hardworking people who care about the whole. And I always I'm not saying this is right or wrong. And I always used to associate the right party, the Republicans, being more mine and my, like, cares more about mine, less government, all of this stuff. So what's confusing to me about what's happening to both parties is they're both starting to look like something different. And I do believe the Aquarian age is upon us and things are changing and unraveling and dismantling before our eyes. So to sort of cling to one party or the other, for me, doesn't feel authentic. So I really related to what you were talking about. I lean in a particular way. I'm okay with paying taxes because I like public schools and I love libraries and I like the roads, right? I don't mind putting in a little for the whole. But again, I agree there's a dark shadow on both sides. And now it seems to be about winning or losing, which we talked about in the last episode. And then it brought me to what I saw Charlie Kirk really talk a lot about when I was watching him. Most of all of his ideals I disagree with just based on my own personal belief system, right? And one of the things that I wanted to know what drives him. I was curious what drives him. And I don't think I'll ever be able to say one thing or the other. And I'm sure everybody listening has multiple ideas. And I have to really, as I have this conversation with you, not care how I'm perceived here. I have to really not care to please one or the other. And like I said, where I come from, I've seen the good in both. I've seen the good in people that have different beliefs than I. And I wish we could see each other a little bit more clearly. I sometimes feel like we get put in these compartments that really don't suit us. And that's why talking about it from an archetypal way is actually really healing. Just to hear you say that made me cry. And why I'm tying it into the men that are passing away and these sort of tragic ways is because Charlie Kirk talked a lot about he felt victimized as a white man after the Floyd, after we finally, in my opinion, woke up to the fact that there's inequity and that Black people in America have not had the same opportunities. In my eyes, based off of history, that was what feels very obvious to me and what I saw as a child. And his denouncing of that was a direct threat to him. And he literally felt that he goes, I'm made to feel bad just for being a white man. And we see that a lot of murders today are conducted by white men. Again, I'm not trying to get political here. I'm just trying to understand that. I do think that there is a crisis going on with men and women, but I'm going to talk about it from the men perspective. And when I pulled cards today, I pull a French deck and I pulled the Magi, which is the magician, but it's the Magi in this deck is very specific. It's talking about using your will and using your faculties in a very particular way. And then I also pulled the Page of Swords upside down, and the word on the reverse side of it is ignorance. So this is a very powerful individual that we're talking about, but he was also in the early stages of his life. I actually have this like premonition that if he were to continue to stay alive, which I wish he would have, because I do think no life should be taken for having views, period. And I actually think he would have eventually gone into the Buddha's middle path. I don't know if it's because he's Libra, but the weight of him, and I think of him energetically, the weight of him is like all in his head, almost as if he was like a bobblehead and had all of the swirling energy of intellect going on in the head. And when you're only operating from intellect, it's almost like there's a disconnect from heart and soul. And I also have seen so many videos where I'm like, oh, this man truly believes that he is a channel for God. He talks more about the Old Testament, Leviticus, in a certain way that doesn't really, there's other passages of Leviticus that I might want to present to him. And there's different parts of the Bible that we might interpret differently. And I do feel like some of it was chosen to get a particular point across. But unfortunately, that is literally what every single human being does. Every single human being has a point of view. And their point of view, they will take out into the world and they will see everything through that point of view. And that point of view will be able to cherry pick what it wants to serve that point of view's purpose.
Exactly.
And if we can't acknowledge that everyone's doing that, and if my goal is to get you to see where you're wrong, this is the bind, and this is the film that I just made, is literally about like a woman after the 2025 election. She leaves her twin brother and her father because she's a political activist, but she really is running. She's all left, I guess. And she comes back to this pacifist. And basically it's not about politics. And that's what a lot of this is too, I think. The politics, okay? The politic structure is like the mom and the dad, and everybody needs it to feel safe or thinks that they need it to feel safe. And so it's very triggering for us when we hear somebody say something that makes us feel unsafe. I have conservative people in my life. And when you talked about earlier, like, will they be able to hear any criticism of Charlie? I don't know that they can. And I don't know that the left can either. I don't know that we're in a place where people can hear duality. So one of the things when I did the reading on some of his energy was that he struggled with the dual nature within. And I think the collective struggles with the dual nature within. I don't think we can have this conversation without talking about the wounded masculine. I just don't think we can have the conversation.
Yeah, I just really want to take in. Oh, man. I notice it brings up so much fear in me when you bring it up. And you're right. You're right. You're right. Okay, there's a couple things I'll say at once, and then I'm going to slow things down. And I really want to be intentionally in slowing things down because actually Charlie Kirk moved so fast. And it's why I get a little overwhelmed. And like, even thinking about starting to dismantle a lot of the stuff that he said, because I agree with you, he cherry-picked so much. And and this is where we get into the dark mirror that we talked about last time. It's so fascinating to me how many people on the right now are accusing people on the left of cherry-picking what Charlie Kirk said to misrepresent what he said, which is very interesting to me because I, like you, because again, I'm a critical thinker and I'm an independent thinker. So when I see a lot of people saying the left is cherry picking, they're taking it out of context, they're misrepresenting, I listen. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go back and listen all the context. And I want people to really know, I listened to entire speeches of Charlie Kirk. I listened to entire debates that he had. I listened to unedited podcast content. So again, if you're making an assumption about me grabbing onto select quotes, don't make that assumption. I want to say the context did not change much. If in some cases it actually made it worse for me. But I just think it's so interesting. And yeah, like, I agree with you. Again, as someone who very much believes in things like systemic oppression, white privilege, yes, it's Charlie Kirk. I found much of what he was saying, I'll be generous here, deeply problematic. And actually like deceptively like hateful rhetoric that I think actually fanned the flames of like division and hatred. Well, I'm sure we'll get into that. But but anyways, the point that I'm making is that it's so interesting to me to see when we start to take a deeper look at a lot of what he was saying, like particularly around George Floyd, for example, because you just mentioned that, he'll cherry pick things in order just to support his argument. So then it's interesting to me that there's so much talk about cherry pick. You're cherry picking Charlie Kirk's quotes. It's like, okay.
Everyone does.
Well, yeah. Charlie Kirk cherry picked a lot. He cherry picked a lot.
Yeah.
And it's so interesting because he would say context matters. And then he would completely ignore context. It's so interesting. But anyways, I feel like I got a little bit of a digression there. I noticed that, yes, I get scared when you mention the masculine wound. I notice that it feels really true when you say it. And I notice that it actually feels taboo or forbidden. And maybe we're like cutting ahead, to where I would typically think we would land at the end of this, because it's like what comes up for me is, yes, I think you're right. I think there's like a deeply wounded masculine. And like I said, I also notice I'm so scared to talk about it because this is where I get scared of the left. If we create space for the masculine wound, is this going to start pissing a lot of people off if we create space for Charlie Kirk's masculine wound? Because look, and I come at it from both ways, because there is this part of me. And look, I know people like this. I'm friends with people like this who genuinely felt, I mean, I literally have a friend, straight white male, who would say things like it's a war out there, like basically felt like he's being persecuted as a white male. This is an interesting guy because he was obsessed with Obama throughout both terms of his presidency. Would not shut the fuck up about Obama. Obama this, Obama that, Obama this, Obama that. Very like socially liberal guy, smart, loving. He's a friend of mine. Felt let down by Obama, ultimately felt let down by the left, and now he is all about Trump. I haven't spoken to him recently, so I don't know if anything's changed in this new term. But Trump this, Trump that, Trump this, Trump that. This is why I'm saying, guys, when I hear people say, like, everyone who votes for Trump is like a deplorable redneck, this, that, and the other, I'm just like, be careful what you say. I mean, I've said this before. I know black people who voted for Trump. I know gay people who voted for Trump. I know deeply spiritual people who voted for Trump. I have my guys like this friend of mine who voted for Trump. Not a redneck deplorable. Not a proud boy. It's just not true. And that's the thing. It's like when we say stuff like that, we're wiping out the humanity of people. Like there are people who voted for Trump for other reasons. And I don't want to say, that is not to say there isn't the Christian national side, the Proud Boy side, the, hateful, bigoted side. That exists too. But you can't, and it's important to acknowledge that because that's real. And that is a threat, to some of our very lives. But it's not the whole story. And when you paint everyone with that brush, you are wiping out their humanity. But coming back to this guy, I would get so pissed at him and frustrated with him. And I would say this to him. I was like, it's so fucking frustrating to me that, like, it's almost like I could almost respect your point of view if you came from the point of view of there are no victims. None of us are victims. It's all an equal playing field, so let's treat life that way. But that's not what you're saying. And this is my issue with Charlie Kirk too. What you're actually saying is there is persecution, there is oppression, there are people in danger. It's the white straight men. Not anyone else. It's the white straight men who are in danger. So I'm like, oh, so there are victims. It's the straight white men who are the victims. And I was just like, and I would say to him, like, the thing that just sort of, I on one hand, I'm like so curious about, and the thing that I get so frustrated by is, if you are feeling this sense of persecution as a straight white male, how do you not use that as an entry point of sudden understanding, empathy, or at least curiosity for how other people live? Like, how do you not? Because, like, I always look at this guy of mine, this friend of mine who's like, it's a war out there and I'm persecuted. And I'm just like, do you realize that if you took your same personality and you were a woman, if you were gay, if you were a person of color, this personality that is speaking up to the war of oppression, you would be the loudest speaking up about systems of oppression. You would be the very thing that you are now dismissing. And like he doesn't make that connection. So I'm saying all this to say, guys, I get it. As someone who's on the left and believes very deeply into systems of oppression, it's not even a belief. To me, it's as real as the sky is blue. I get how infuriating that can be, right? That said, when you brought in the masculine wound, Molly, I suddenly had this moment of compassion for, oh, holy shit. These are people who have lived a life a certain way. And the matrix is changing. And it's being dismantled. And they are having to taste something for the very first time that they have never tasted. And I think, part of what I'm feeling right now is like they are experiencing that sudden fear. They are experiencing that life or death, holy shit. Like the ground that once felt so solid is trembling underneath me. And I guess, again, if I'm going to fast forward to the possible lesson of this podcast, on a certain level, if we are to embody what we want to be embodied in the greater world, it's not that we let them off the hook, right? And let them get away with whatever they might be doing in their blind spots. But it is to maybe start cultivating, I'm going to say it, this sense of compassion for, let's come back to Christ. Like, I'm butchering the quote, but forgive them for they know not what they do. It's like, can we start to deepen some sort of compassionate awareness for they are having a crisis of identity right now? And the main point that I want to make is me even saying that, my heart tenses up. And I'm like, I'm scared to say this because I can already feel perhaps the potential pitchforks, from people on the left who are like, what the fuck are you saying? And they don't deserve compassion and this, that, and the other. And I'm like, for me, this is the fucking problem. Like that I'm sort of sitting here in my corner saying, I want to hold space for the complexity of all of this. I want to have compassion for everyone involved, including tough love, rigorous boundaries, and what I want to say no to. And we just live right now in such a culture, like you said, of tribalism and fear that it's like to even say this out loud, to even say, holy shit, there's a masculine wound. And the last thing I'll say before I turn it back over to you is even saying what I'm saying right now, I then sort of flip back to the other side of, and I do get that frustration of like, why is it on me to hold compassionate space for the one who's been in the position of power for so long? Like, this trickles down to the personal level, like when we're the one in the family system, right, who does work on ourselves, and then we have to fucking hold space for our unconscious parents or our unconscious, like, why is the burden on me to do the fucking work and then hold space for the oppressor? So this is the thing, I get all sides of it, but I'll stop there.
That's the bind of the seer. That's the bind of the seer, right? And if we don't deal with this masculine wound, it will continue to get worse. And listen, I've had conversations with my best friend and many of my female friends who literally are like, are you really trying to me? Like, are you actually trying to sympathize with this person? Like, are you actually trying? And I get that. And I will like cower away and I'll be like, no, because I'm afraid. And here's the thing, though, and I've said this on this podcast before. What you just brought up, have had to look at the masculine wound from a young age in order to be safe. I have had to understand why they're acting a certain way in order to understand who I am, what love is, am I safe? So I've had to. So if you come from a particular type of home with a particular type of man who also came from a particular type of man who was worse than that man and his man before him and his man before him, all the way back to what you brought up in the beginning of the karma of the founding fathers, when you found something and it's only the founding fathers and you leave out the mother, we have an imbalance. When we're talking about the dualistic nature of being able to hold that I can see both sides of things, why is that so triggering for so many people is because of the denouncement of things within ourselves that we're not willing to accept or tolerate. And it's all the shadow work that you're always talking about. It's all the stuff that we're running from. And that's why archetypes are important, because if I look at the whole of a tarot deck, every single card has value, even the Tower and the Death card. People fear it, they hate it, but that's a piece of the whole. Right? I'm looking at the universe and all of the pieces that make up one entity, one being, one human being with all of its multiple parts. And you can't have one without the other. Every person on this planet has their archetypal point in history that causes a revolution. I thought that what happened with George Floyd was going to start to help people to see the inequity. And what it did, and same with Obama, like, having Obama in office triggered so many people to go straight into their lack and limitation, fear-driven stuff. Or like you said, the disappointment, like, oh, here's this Messiah. Here we're going back to Messiah, which I think is a really important thing to talk about with the wounded masculine and with Charlie Kirk and this whole idea. I am looking also at some of the cards that I pulled, and it's the divine masculine card in reverse. It's the Emperor in reverse. Not knowing how to have your power and live in the world and needing a rebirth, and having the Judgment card here, like a rebirth of the divine masculine. And what that means is going to mean that both of us, feminine, masculine, non-binary, are all going to have to actually give a shit about one another. And that's sort of the bind for a lot of, but there's something I really want to talk about. There's a friend of mine who's a comic, and in the 2000s, I would say 2014, maybe, or maybe a little bit earlier than that. His whole shtick was about being a handsome, and he is a handsome white man who was told he could have anything in life growing up in the 90s. So apparently in the 90s in Sacramento, or wherever he was told that he could have anything being a white man, that he could have all the power in the world and everything will be easy for him. And his shtick was like, it's a lie. And he would do this sort of thing and sort of make fun of that whole preconceived idea. And so there is a threat that we're talking about that I do think the loneliness too, talking about, like Charlie Kirk talked about to men, he tried to get them off porn, off this. He would talk to gay men and tell them, like a gay man came up to his podium and said, I was gay for 10 years and I found Jesus Christ and I am now straight. And he said, I was told that couldn't happen. And he's like, it can happen. And then Charlie Kirk sort of said, what he was saying was that, yes, you can denounce. He's like, so you're still attracted to men? And he said, yes. And he said, but you can denounce that, right? Like you can abstain from that attraction. So he really viewed it as sin. And that is where he and I would disagree. And even certain portions of the Bible, he was reading with his wife on a podcast, and he said he read from the Bible because they were talking about submission. And she was saying, I submit to my husband. And then Charlie Kirk read this portion from the Bible that said, husband and a wife submit to each other. And then they proceeded to talk about just the wife submitting, which I thought was really interesting. And so I think when we leave out the feminine, or when we leave out the masculine, and we are always going to set ourselves up for failure. And that's why I think like the founding fathers is also a big part of this conversation, leading to this wounded situation that we're in. The patriarch affects all of us. It affects men in a negative way. It affects women in a negative way. It affects non-binary people in a negative way. The fear around non-binary seems to be one of the most, for the people back home where I'm from, that seems to be the most pervasive fear, is trans people seem to terrify a lot of people who don't have an understanding of what it is. They think that the alt-left is trying to get everybody to turn trans, and that's this big conversion sort of situation. And so when I think of the world waking up around the George Floyd time, I think of non-binary thinking, which has to do with coming into integration of being able to see both sides of everything, the lover's cards, like a union of opposites, being able to honor my masculine side, honor my feminine side, honor the gray. I love God very much, actually. That's why some of this Christian stuff really is something I have to constantly sort of bring to God and ask questions of like, how could they say this? Can you show me, how do you show empathy? And I think, or how can you show me what empathy looks like when they're saying that they are following the word of Christ, but then they are saying that they have a superiority over others, and that there is a black and white, right or wrong when it comes to what love is and orientation. And Charlie Kirk really was very open about him feeling like women who were career focused or not married and having kids were sort of an abomination and what's ruining the world. That was like something that he really felt strongly about. I'm a single woman. It doesn't even affect me. It doesn't make me angry. It just makes me sad that people can't see the value in every single human being, and how you need an auntie, right? Like you need an aunt who doesn't have children to show up, to be able to, like, you need all of these people in the village. Every single person in the village has a right to be there and has a purpose if we allow people to have their purpose. What if the village needs to have the alt-right, needs to have the alt-left together working in harmony in order for it to continue to spin? What if the universe seeks balance, right? So if we're out of balance, some extreme situation is going to come in to whack us back into balance. Is this what's happening to us right now, where we're so out of whack that these extreme points of view are popping up in order for the pendulum to swing? I don't know. I just sort of feel like At this point, you cannot say anything without being persecuted. I really want to say one more thing. Jesus, persecution, Trump, Charlie Kirk. Oh, let's go to Obama as well. If you feel that they feel that this is the second coming because that's how Trump got elected. He was being persecuted, and Charlie Kirk would always say, like, they tried to sue him. They tried to do this. They tried to do that, but he overcame it like the Messiah, right? Like the Messiah, like he's being persecuted as Christ was, right? And the reality is that his actions of how he treated others, of how the things that he has done, facts do not matter. Because you were talking earlier about like the cherry picking, but also you're talking about like, how can they not see a certain side? It's like, well, we cannot see somebody else's side if we feel, so this is what I was thinking. We cannot see somebody else's side if we do not feel secure within our own. And I think there's an identity crisis going on. And I think people are so afraid to claim their own home within, their own feeling of security, which you talked about last episode, and find their own point of view and not need others to agree with them because they probably don't know what it is. And if you tell me that everything I believe is wrong, then I'm not okay. I am no longer safe. I really feel like we're in a safety bind.
Yeah. Can I ask you something?
Yeah.
Intuitively. No, there was something that I wrote. You know, as you know, I write notes before these, and now I use ChatGPT to really help me develop my thoughts. And there was something that it was the first piece of content I really saw after I learned of Charlie Kirk's murder. And I wrote it out because I immediately saw the themes and the patterns. And I was going to kind of like re-articulate it on this episode. But I was thinking I could just read what I wrote because I kind of wrote it out very clearly.
Yeah.
I have a point to make in response to what you just said, but I also think it's connected to what I wrote. Do you think I should read what I wrote right now?
Yes.
Okay, I want to start by simply naming what I immediately saw once news of Charlie Kirk broke. And this was honestly before I even knew very much about Charlie Kirk at all. It was a fitness influencer who I actually like on Instagram, calling out the immediate response of some liberals/leftists who are actively celebrating Kirk's death. Now, I actually agree with him here regarding the notion that we need to stay consistent in principle. We talked about that last time in our Orange County episode.
Yes.
Meaning you cannot say you are against gun violence and then actively celebrate someone's death at the hands of gun violence. It doesn't matter what the victim may have stood for or believed in. It doesn't matter if the gun victim had no empathy for other gun victims. If you truly stand against gun violence, then you have to be consistent in that. Otherwise, you are no different than those you claim to be opposed against. This fitness influencer himself was lamenting the violence against Kirk and naming the tragedy of this violence. He then spoke about the need for civil disagreement over violent reactivity. Again, I'm in agreement. He spoke about the need to surrender our anger in favor of the willingness to at least listen to one another. Again, I'm in agreement. He then proposed what I think was a very naive and, in my opinion, overly idealistic scenario where he was, quote unquote, sure that the assailant, who we now know as Tyler Robinson, and Kirk could have sat down over coffee and hashed out their different ideas, listened to each other, and come to middle ground agreements. Now, I don't personally believe Kirk showed much willingness to listen, and I feel that way even more, having really exposed myself to him. I also don't think he was even remotely curious about other people's experiences, but regardless, I can still get behind the general idea of what this fitness influencer was saying. But this is where things get interesting. This influencer who is literally calling for surrendering anger. This influencer who is literally calling for finding common ground for those who think differently than us. This influencer who is literally issuing a call to meet each other in our humanity, then goes on to say that anyone celebrating this death is a quote-unquote scumbag. Literally uses the word scumbag repeatedly, which, by the way, is interesting given that that's also what Kirk called George Floyd. He then says that they need to, quote-unquote, find God. And here's where it gets even more interesting. There were people who politely disagreed with his take in the comments. People who respectfully posed challenging questions to him in the comments. And I stress respectfully because no one is more sensitive to dismissive knee-jerk reactivity in the comments than me. And I apply this to both sides of the debates. I find it so counterproductive and painful. These were actually calm, respectful comments. The influencer's response, find God. Each and every time. Find God. Simply because they disagreed with him or dared to challenge him, as if he himself is the arbiter of God and God's wisdom. Even writing these words, I feel the swell in my heart and in my chest. The swell of registering someone's extreme hypocrisy and huge blind spot. Here is a young man in one breath sounding the alarm for surrendering our anger and finding common ground in our humanity as a spiritual principle. Then in the very next breath, dismissing a wide swath of people as literal scumbags. Zero curiosity about where their response might be coming from inside of them. Zero openness to maybe understand why they felt outwardly celebratory in this moment, where that rage was coming from inside of them. Zero desire to understand the other viewpoint, just scumbags. And then to top it all off, if someone disagrees with him, even politely, there is literally no openness to engage with that voice of disagreement. This coming from the young man who just spoke about the possibility of Charlie Kirk and Tyler Robinson sitting down to coffee to civilly discuss their ideas, dismissing them with the self-righteous order to find God, implying they know nothing of God, and that his version of God is the definitive version of God because he says so. And what's crazy to me as I type this out is that he truly believes that he was justified in his response because he truly believes he is the voice of compassion here. In his mind, people celebrating gruesome murder is monstrous, which, again, I get the point. It is a disturbing and monstrous thing to do. It's hypocritical coming from the left, and it's lacking compassion. But there's still humanity underneath that. And so in his mind, rather than registering the humanity and actually bringing the spirit of Christ consciousness in God's compassion for our fellow man or woman and everyone in between. Instead, he now apparently has the quote unquote godly right to dismiss them as scumbags and to be the voice of a self-righteous God. It's the voice that says, I'm compassionate, they're not. Therefore, I have God on my side. They're the scumbag monsters, and I get to point the finger at them as the problem and interpreting any possible disagreement with his viewpoint as someone attacking the very notion that we should have a compassionate response towards Charlie's death, which means they are lacking in compassion according to his standards, which makes them scumbags who don't know God. And here he is, practicing the very anger he supposedly opposes, practicing the very dehumanization he supposedly opposes, practicing the very division he supposedly opposes. But of course, he's justified in it, right? In his mind. And of course, there's the huge irony in my mind that the very notion of dismissively telling someone to find God simply because they disagree with you goes against the very spirit of God and what I think are true Christian values. Does he think God would want him using God's name as a vehicle for self-righteously judging others and dismissing their humanity? Is that the true voice of empathy and human understanding? His condemnation, his judgment, his dismissive, his I'll say it, virtue signaling actually goes against the very nature of God, as I understand it. And I'd also say Christ consciousness, as I understand it, that he's allegedly esteeming. It's like the moment he gets on his high horse and uses God as a form of judgment is the very moment he actually gets away from God. And by the way, this exists on the left as well, of course. So dismissing all Trump voters as deplorables, for example, or, in the case of, I'm going off script here, but, there's an influencer who I love. I think his name is Dean Withers. He's this like really intelligent, like super smart, sharp young man. He's on the left. He has these debates with people on the right where he just sort of pokes holes through everything. But I want to say here, just to like keep this reasonably balanced, he cried when he found out about Charlie Kirk's death. And there was like a reel of him basically finding out about it in almost real time, and he cried. And when I tell you, so many of his followers tore him down for crying over Charlie Kirk's death. They viewed it as a betrayal. They accused him of being MAGA. They questioned his liberal values. He literally had to make another video explaining why he cried. And then on that video, if you read the comments, it's people, basically still accusing him of being a fraud. So I want to say this exists on the left as well. To me, coming back to what I wrote, this young man illustrated the ultimate example of someone not practicing the very willingness to surrender the anger and the willingness to find common ground that he is self-righteously claiming the world needs. Everyone in this country wants unity, but it's always everyone else's fault that there is no unity. And then we get to judge them for it and say they're the problem, which then reinforces the division. No one wants to be the one that actually embodies the surrender and grace that we say we all need, including Charlie Kirk, by the way, but we'll get there. So this is immediately what I saw in this post. The hypocrisy, the blind spot, the self-righteous conviction of being right, someone claiming they're for humanity, unity, and common ground while blindly reinforcing principles of division, finger-pointing, and blame, the blind spot. Pointing the fingers at others rather than seeing the finger that's pointing back at yourself. And it just feels to me, this is what it feels like Charlie Kirk's murder is opened on such a deep level. This is what feels like it's here. People who think they're calling out the system while they are lost in that very system, which is also how I very much see Charlie Kirk. So much to say, but I will pause there for now. So that's where I finished the writing. And I think the point that I'll just sort of quickly make to kind of wrap this into what you said, it just felt important for me to like get really specific about what I'm talking about here in terms of like the blind spot in the shadow that I think is being illuminated, that I think Charlie Kirk's murder is here to show us in such a huge fucking way. And the reason why I think this goes back all the way back to the founding of our nation that you touched on, the founding fathers, the lack of safety, like the fear of duality, right? What I'm so aware of in terms of how this country started was about survival. It was about us versus them in so many different ways. I mean, it was about us asserting our independence, from, what we could call an oppressive nation, Britain, fighting for our freedom from an oppressive force. So this country was founded in so many ways on, it was tribal in nature. It was us versus them. And also let's bring in the fact that we stole the land from the native people in pursuit of our freedom, right? Because we talked about this last episode. It's my freedom at the expense of yours, my survival at the expense of yours. And I'm so aware that is how our nation was founded. We're taking this land because it's our survival. We're declaring this freedom for our survival. Everything was framed in terms of us versus them. Fight or flight, scarcity, control. One person's going to win out over the other. And so you just sort of brought that up about when we explored that last episode about maybe we're arriving at the time where we can realize we survived and we can shift out of the fight or flight fear, because it's the fight or flight fear that's scared of the binary. It's like, oh shit, if I drop my guard for one moment, I might get annihilated. I might get attacked from either side. So I got to hold tight to my opinion or else I'm getting, it's like my straight white male friend says, it's war. I'm going to be persecuted. I'm going to get killed for who I am. We're all feeling that. So that's why I think we're perhaps in a reckoning with how the energetic pattern of how this country was founded, where this fight or flight, us or them tribalism is finally catching up to us. And I think, we can get deeper into it. To me, Charlie Kirk, part of why I think he was so fucking dangerous is because he fed into the tribalism. He fed into the story of persecution. It's us versus them. It's an attack on traditional values. It's an attack on white men. It's an attack on civilization. He literally framed it as an attack on civilization. So we better get ready for a war, which to me, and that's what to me made him, part of what made him so dangerous is that he was channeling, I think, some real threads of Christian virtue, grace. I think he also had huge bigotry, homophobia, and racist rhetoric. But he was channeling at least a pretense or certain types of Christianity into a lens that said, this is war, it's us versus them, tribal, which, like I said, just keeps the whole fucking division going. So I just think we're in a moment right now of reckoning with the very tribalism from which this country started. And that's kind of what I hear when I hear you speak. And the reason why I just wanted to bring in this very specific instance of this influencer, I talk about the relationship between the individual and the collective. I feel like this rigid grip on my viewpoint does have an energetic relationship to the collective energetic pattern of the very founding of our nation. So I'll stop there.
Okay. When you brought up such an incredible point on who is the arbiter of God. And when you were talking about this person saying, find God, is that what he said to everyone? Find God, find God.
Over and over.
I'm going to say this because I don't know that a Christian would be listening to this or not from back home in Wheaton, Illinois, but if you are.
No, no, there are Christian listeners.
But I want to say specifically to the people that I love and the people that I have no judgment of, to be honest with you. I actually have no judgment. I'm going to be honest. You might not believe this if you're listening. I seek God in all my affairs. In fact, something happened to me 28 years ago where I made a decision to seek God for the rest of my life. And when I'm seeking God, I find it everywhere. So what I don't understand is where people put a human ceiling on the infinite and they make the infinite finite by saying, well, God loves us all, but here's where it stops. And my God is better than your God. And my God is all of these ideas going back to tribalism. I mean, there's a God for each tribe, apparently, which goes back to paganism when they used to believe the gods in the sky. And then we go back to all these different deities in which we could all worship. And we always ask ourselves, what am I worshiping? What am I worshiping right now? Am I worshiping the need for power? Am I worshiping such a beautiful point you made about, so we survived, now what? This is wildly important. I was talking with somebody about who I've talked to many times about it, and she was telling me how Vince Gilligan, the creator of Breaking Bad, has regrets. He's admitted a kind of regret about fueling the glorification of Walter White and saying he hoped people would be disturbed by his choices, not emboldened by them. He said that he underestimated how far audiences would go to empathize with a charismatic anti-hero. And it sort of makes me go back to your point about the survival mechanism of like, we've survived. So now I have this big theme that I talked about probably in every podcast I've been with you lately, which is like, we as a nation cannot even agree on who the villain is. So if you're writing a story and you can't agree on who the villain is, how do you finish that story? And what is that story? Like, it's so confusing. Would you watch a movie where you don't know who the villain is, right? So then we're talking about where is God? So to me, when somebody says, find God, find God, find God, right? And they're saying it from a pulpit of superiority. It kind of goes in with the white privilege, which Charlie Kirk didn't think existed. But where is God, right? Where is God in intellectual sparring? When the intellectual sparring is coming from a motive to win. And what God are we referring to? I could pull a passage, and this is the whole thing with Bible study, which I went to CCD and I had to learn, and I liked a lot of what I learned, but my first job was at a nunnery, and I had wonderful nuns who were very fair and compassionate, and I had priests that I grew up with that I saw embodying the Christ that made sense to me, which was love and kindness. 20 years prior, that parish, also a lot of boys were unfortunately victimized by the repression, the sexual repression. And Charlie Kirk talks a lot about this sort of what I would call sexual repression. And I think that's actually quite dangerous. Also going to college campuses and as somebody who didn't believe in school and said it was a scam, and talking about education being a scam. Also very interesting, dangerous. And I think in particular, I think that's where he was working for somebody else. And his motives were, I'm sure he believed that he was a vessel and a channel for Christ and all of that. And I'm sure that he was a great father. And I'm sure that he is the people who loved him have an immense loss. But I also think it's more important to talk about all of the people who are cheering him on, because he's just one man. But It's like all of these people who are like white privilege isn't a thing. And they feel that acknowledging the past and saying that our whole American history is just they want to make it like all slave labor and it was all bad and we don't even get to like have any pride for our past. And it's like, no, what we're saying is acknowledging the truth of the past doesn't harm you if you actually have empathy. It doesn't harm you if you actually have self-reflection, forgiveness. But if you feel something's going to be taken away from you, then you cannot do it. And you go into, as I love what you said, the wipeout mode. When I was watching Charlie Kirk, I kept asking myself, what was his adversity? What adversity has he faced? The white male that we're talking about, the wounded man, the male who was told that they were going to have power and then grew up in a society and people all of a sudden hate them, or they feel that people hate them, but they still have power. And now we have a bunch of white men that are grappling for power and putting on military outfits and going into cities and saying, I'm going to brutally force power. That's how terrified they are of losing power. And women backing it, saying like the feminists have ruined it. And we no longer, which I understand, like, yeah, listen, if you want to put me in a kitchen, I would be happy to be put in a kitchen and not have to go to work. I'm not lying because I actually find cooking to be a meditative experience.
No, I'm the same way.
But at the same point, that's not what it really was back then. Women didn't have value. That was the problem, is that there wasn't a sense, we're not going to get into that. It's a whole separate issue. But I kind of just want to go back to when he was, the debate that I sent you, he was debating an incredibly intelligent woman.
Was it Brianna Joy Gray?
Yeah, Bernie Sanders' press secretary.
Yeah, Brianna Joy Gray.
Yes, thank you. And the way in which she handled that was, I could not have done what she did. And he, as you said earlier, you said something really important. I didn't feel his curiosity with her. I didn't feel his...
It's an understatement.
I know, but I'm trying to be fair here. But I did notice his curiosity with Bill Maher and Governor Newsom. I did. I saw him be a little bit more cowering to both of those interviews because I watched both of those. And so there was a area where, and also I think it's important to say that since Trump has been in office, that I think the most recent stat was like 300,000 Black women have lost their jobs. That this is really affecting people. And white people are clearly scared because they feel victimized somehow. And I think the most important thing that's been talked about on this podcast so far is when you were talking about victimization. And if you're going to agree that everyone's a victim, then we can have a conversation. But if not, then we can't. And I think if we could speak more to that too in regards to all of this, because I think that there could, if everybody could actually come from that standpoint, then there might be an opening. But I have to ask you, Jamie, what are we trying to do here, right? Like, when I talk about this with other people, specifically conservatives, and I calmly ask them questions, they say they don't talk about politics. And then they post it all over their media, and they talk about politics with other people who also watch Fox News. That is my experience, but they will not talk about it with me or anybody else who has an opposing view. So when I talk to my other friends that are maybe agreeing with me, and I want to talk about it with them, they say, well, you can't really talk. They all say, and they're not wrong, but they all say you can't get through to anybody. So it's all pointless. It's all meaningless. It doesn't matter. We can't have those conversations anymore. So I guess my question is, where do we go from here? And I also want to just quickly say, because I haven't said this yet, the reaction after Charlie Kirk's death was ridiculous on all, like everybody was moving so fast. We had misinformation about the shooter like 8 different times. Everybody was reporting and talking on their devices before they had any information on both sides. And a man had just been shot and killed. Like, why does everybody have to have an opinion about that when they don't even have the facts?
Oh, my God. I know.
It was insane.
I know.
It was totally insane. Jimmy Kimmel being fired was like strawmanning, but like, he didn't actually talk about Charlie Kirk. He talked about the shooter based off of the information that we all had at that exact time. And probably too soon. And he was basically spreading misinformation, but he didn't know he was spreading misinformation information, but it's like that rapid, quick fire reactionary, which is the business that he's in. So, okay. But like for the rest of us, like we're not in the business of having to respond to everything all the time. And so that was sort of how we haven't even grieved what's going on, which is there was 2 shootings that day. There was a shooting in, am I correct in saying that, in Colorado?
Yeah.
Wasn't there another school shooting?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Wasn't there just one last week? I guess to wrap it up, I guess my question to you is just like, I don't know what my motive is moving forward other than trying to, like when I sat down before this podcast to connect to my soul and God, I was like, what help me connect to like what my purpose is. And all I could feel was like love. So I guess like with tears in my eyes, like how do we find our way back to our heart?
Well, I'm so aware, Molly, when you say I had a conscious experience of wanting to connect with love and to embody love, and I'm crying as I speak it because I'm feeling it. You're doing it right now. I mean, right now in this moment, you are connected to your heart. You're connected to your sense of love. What I hear and feel is like a love for your fellow humans. And first of all, like, because I really heard you say that everyone moved so fast afterward, and I agree with you. I actually meant to mention that up top. I was so struck by how fast everyone moved. And, you know, my instinct with everything like this, whether it's COVID, Charlie Kirk's murder, is to slow down. You know, like I never want to race to a microphone. I never want to race to my camera. I'm just like, I need to slow the fuck down and just feel this. And I wrote about this on Instagram, and I'll say this now to everyone listening. It is okay if you don't know how you feel yet. It is okay if you're confused. And I really believe that. And I'll just say that, like, I always find my own inner sovereignty by allowing myself to go at a different pace than the world. It's a lot easier now that I'm in New Mexico, I won't lie, but like I move slowly, even if the world is moving fast. And I think it's also interesting because I said this earlier, Charlie Kirk moved fast, very fast. And like that debate, you know, I was laughing when you talked about how he didn't show curiosity with Brianna Joy Gray in that on debate night, because I mean, you were being generous. It was the opposite of that. He actively didn't want to hear anything she said. He wouldn't let her talk. He cut her off. He interrupted her. Totally, it was actual gaslighting. I mean, I remember like she started by bringing in like a very specific point about the GI Bill to illustrate systemic racism. And he's like, you know, he then is like, oh, well, you're talking about redlining, da, 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 da. So she starts talking about redlining. And then he goes, well, wait, are we talking about redlining or are we talking about the GI Bill? But it's like, Charlie, you're the one who deflected to the red. And now you're putting it back on her. And she even stopped at one point and just said to him, I mean, and by the way, first 10 minutes, this is not like an hour into the debate. First 10 minutes, she literally stops and she just says to him, why are you here? Like, why are you here? Because it's true. He was moving so fast because all he wanted to do was to shut her down and to win. And to our previous point, he cherry picks facts. And again, she called it out. She's like, you're just cherry picking. I mean, she didn't use the word, but like basically you're just cherry picking details to justify your point. And you're not willing to engage with me about a bigger conversation about, and again, Charlie Kirk is the first one to say context matters, nuance matters. I mean, you know, he said this in his speech where he called George Floyd a scumbag. And I just loved it because, I mean, it's not actually funny, but I found it like from a human folly perspective, I found it so darkly funny. This guy literally saying context matters, nuance matters. George Floyd is a scumbag. And I'm just like, okay, that is the most reductive thing you could ever say.
Interesting with his death too. Yeah, the reaction. Yeah.
Well, no, exactly. That's what I'm saying. Like, I feel like the reaction to his death is such a reflection of his field. And so, you know, going into the George Floyd thing for a moment, it's like, even if I go, like, I understand what he was trying to say. And let me be very clear, I do not agree with him. But let's just even go with like what he was saying for a second, right? Which was the point that he was trying to make basically was like, he was sort of saying the left was holding George Floyd up as like this perfect innocent victim in order to fan the flames of emotions and like basically carry the tide of their anarchist attack on civilization. And what he was trying to say was it's more nuanced than that because he actually wasn't just this innocent guy. He has like drugs in his system. He has a criminal history. Again, let's get back into cherry picking details. He loved to point out that he held a gun to a pregnant woman. So he was trying, like in his mind, nuance meant let's acknowledge the fact that George Floyd wasn't just this totally innocent guy. And in his mind, that's nuance. Now, let's just even say that's valid, which in my mind, it's not. I guess I'll speak to that in a moment. But let's just say he has a point there, right? Again, Christian grace, Christian compassion, Christian understanding, Christian brotherhood. You have a guy, George Floyd, who's not perfect, as none of us are. Okay, he's struggling. He struggled with drugs. He struggled with crime. You want to make a point that he wasn't like totally innocent. There is a way you can language that is much different than he's a scumbag. You can talk, you know what I mean? Though, seriously, like you can have, I mean, it actually
100%.
you know, it's like, no, I know why you're laughing. But like for me, it's actually like, as I'm saying this, I want to cry a little bit because it like, again, it's the dehumanization of like that's going on that's just so distressing to me. But to sit there and call George Floyd a scumbag, you know, especially knowing what he represents to so many people. But it's like you could have said this was a man who struggled. You know, this was a deeply conflicted man who at some points was like on the wrong side of the law. There are ways you could have articulated this same point, which again, the point itself to me is so flawed. But like putting that aside, you could have articulated the same point with such different language. You know, and to be this self-professed like vessel of Christ and Christ's consciousness in God, and to then go around publicly and use words like scumbag, knowing, by the way, even let's just say you're not an overt card-carrying racist who just like hates black people, this, that, or the other, but you fucking know there are people who listen to you who are like that. You know that. You know that. And you're using language like this that you know, and even if we're going to leave aside the like card-carrying over bigots, right? Knowing the culture of division in our country right now, to use the word scumbag, you know, to describe George Floyd, to describe a man of color, like it's like you have to understand taking responsibility for your power and your influence. You are fanning the flames of anger and division. And I think for me, what made it so dangerous was like that it was in service of like Christianity and Christian values. And what I also want to say too, like as I'm talking about this is like just to get even to the underlying point, again, going back to this fitness influencer, doing the very thing that you're accusing others of. Okay, so you're accusing the left of using this very specific piece of video footage where George Floyd gets killed to kind of inflame an outsized reaction that's actually like a tribalistic attack on civilization. Well, what are you doing, Charlie Kirk? You're talking about the fact that George Floyd got into trouble with the law 10 years ago. He held a gun to a pregnant woman 10 years ago. You're not talking about how he tried to reform. You're not talking about like the community service he provided when he got like out of prison. You're also spreading misinformation because one of the big things that he really liked to do was to talk about like the level of fentanyl in his system, which, you know, he's basically implying that he didn't, you know, because as we know, there was controversy over how did George Floyd actually die. There were 2 independent autopsies. It was ruled that he died because of like the police force. Charlie Kirk, he knows what he's doing. He's cherry picking certain details to feed into certain narratives that are going to emotionally feed into the division that got sparked by BLM, right? Now, the other reason why I'm bringing this up is at the start of all this, context matters, nuance matters. And I kind of referenced this before, but I'm just like, you're saying context matters. And yet you're cherry picking details about George Floyd to discredit the entire framework that gave rise to the uprising in response to his death. Like, you are wiping out the entire context of our nation, which is stealing land from indigenous people, enslaving Africans. You know, like, it's like you are wiping out that context. And this is what I want to say, coming back to like the willingness to even like hold multiple perspectives. Let's just say that is truly what you think, feel, and believe, that like we're in a different time now, that the Civil Rights Act, it's played out and like now it's an even playing field. Let's just say like that is what you truly believe, right? Let's just even say it's true. It's, again, your lack of total curiosity about what all these other people are saying. It's like the lack of, well, okay, I don't necessarily see it this way or agree with it or get it, but like I want to say millions do. So rather than me just labeling them and wiping them out, why don't I at least like try to find out more about where they're coming from? So the reason why I'm saying all of this is, again, I'm coming back to the fitness influencer. I'm coming back to what I see on both the right and the left. What I experience in Charlie Kirk is the epitome of someone who was guilty of the very things that he was accusing the others of in sort of a tribal fight or flight state. And to come back to the original point, the way he did that, he would talk fast. He would move fast. He wanted to win. He wanted to talk over people. And you brought in a really great point about him being in his head and not connected to his heart. So this is my long way back to the original point, Molly. When I hear you taking this all in and connecting to an intention to love and feeling your heart and being willing to cry tears. And what I hear and feel in that is you are connecting even to someone like Charlie Kirk who you don't agree with, and to your relatives, back in the conservative town that you don't agree with. And you're feeling your heart and your love there. And the last thing I'll say, I know I've said a lot right now. The last thing I'll say is you're actually helping me because, as I said, I was in so much truly emotional pain these last few weeks, taking in what we're doing to each other. And there was a way that it could almost feel, I don't know if helpless is the right word, but powerless or helpless, but you're actually helping me to see now, like, that's me connected to my love. Because the truth is, and this is the last thing I'll say, I have no problem with Christianity. I actually, in some ways, I'm so grateful that I was born and raised Jewish because I don't have the cultural baggage around Christianity. I have always, this was my dirty secret for so long, that I felt such a deep resonance with Christ and Christ consciousness. I like churches, to me, I walk into them, I feel like I'm getting emotional. Like I feel such divine grace when I walk into them. Mary Magdalene as an archetypal energy. I mean, the patron saints, I think it's so beautiful. But the way that I experience Christ and Christ consciousness is what I'm speaking to. Like there is a place in me where 100%, there's so many fucking people who annoy me, who piss me off. Personality level, there's so many people I'm not going to have at my table, but I will say this, there is a place where I have such a deep abiding love for my fellow humans. I really mean that. And that to me is Christ consciousness. Christ consciousness to me is to see people at their absolute worst and to still be willing to extend them grace, mercy, and some level of forgiveness, which, by the way, does not mean excusing them for their destructive actions. We all have to answer for our actions. But in the place where multiple things can be true at once, you can hold someone responsible for their actions, and you can also have love and grace for them in the place where their soul has gone someplace dark. So to me, these are aspects of Christ consciousness, and it is why it is so painful for me to see someone like Charlie Kirk, who I do think is powerful and who I do think there is some sort of connection somewhere in there to kind of like a foundational, maybe what we might call like traditional connection to like Christ and what Christ was meant to embody. But when I see him use that to like shut down, like in this case, Breonna Joy Gray, or to call George Floyd a scumbag, to inflame division in the name of Christ consciousness, that's where it's painful for me. But sorry, this is like the last thing I'll say. But this is also so in the duality of everything, what you're helping me to understand is that pain that I feel is my connection to divine grace and mercy. It's my connection to unity. It's my love for my fellow humans, even someone like Charlie Kirk, who I disagree with so fucking deeply. And I think it starts here. And so I just want to say, I don't want to bypass your question because I hear you asking something really important, which is what do we actually do with this? But I also want to say, I think that can also be a sneaky place where we charge forward to like, well, what do we do? What do we do? Rather than honoring what you just expressed and embodied. And this truly is the last thing I'll say, because you brought something up really important. And I heard this expressed. Lecrae has a really great podcast, and he brought on two Christians, one of whom leaned more right and one of whom leaned more left. And they talked about, in a respectful way, what Charlie Kirk wrote. I really urge people to go and listen to it. But one of them made this really important point, that it's like everything that we're talking about. Everyone was so quick to politicize his murder that there was no space for mourning. And yes, it's true. Like, tons of people are getting killed. I get that. And in some ways, like, Charlie Kirk's murder isn't more or less important than anyone else, but he stood for something. He was a catalyst. For whatever reason, he was more like center stage, than these like Democratic senators or whatever. And his murder, it reverberated something. And I think it may have been the guy who was more like on the right, but he was sort of saying this towards the left, where it was like people from the left were coming out and saying, like, yeah, it's terrible, but. And it was like they were so scared to just leave out the but. To our point, because it's almost like if you leave out the but, it like creates room for something to come in and attack us, right? They didn't want to just leave it at, this was horrible, and then leave the but, like we can come back to the but later. And so I feel like we never actually really got to mourn. And so I think people on the right had a point about that. The problem is, it's like this influencer, that point then got politicized. And it's just like we're all in such a fucking rush to take each other down that we never even had an opportunity to just fucking pause, slow down, stop, and say, this guy got murdered. It's horrible. And by the way, this was reflecting a much fucking deeper problem that affects all of us in this nation. And we need to grieve this.
100%. And what is unearthing too is that there are all of these people, growing up in the 90s, 2000s, where it wasn't cool. And honestly, it really wasn't like cool or maybe even accepted to be like racist or bigot or super Christian. Like, it was considered like bad, like that was a bad thing. Right. And so the person who took their life was leaning more towards Trump towards the end of his life, just FYI. And there was a deep loneliness within that. And there was somebody I saw online. She was like, oh, as a woman, I can't have my whole life. I can't have my views without being persecuted. And this is how the Trumpers feel. This is how they feel. Some of them are more emboldened than others, but they actually feel that they are being persecuted. And that's why they really connect that to Christ. I connect to Christ since I was a child as well, for whatever reason. And I literally like sang for the Pope. And I remember being underneath the Sistine Chapel, just like jaw dropped to the floor. There's a beauty and divinity that's present, but there's Jesus to me is a great metaphysician, right? Showing us that God is above, so below, which is also Jewish, right? And so it's sort of saying like God is within me and if within you and within all of us. And that's why when they say seek God, you're asking us all to go within and seek ourselves. Are you doing the same, right? And so how can I preach to somebody else ever rather than be curious, which is what you're talking about. But when I think about these sort of alt-right people feeling like they don't have a voice, and now they're starting to have this voice in this movement. And there's literally like a movement I think Charlie Kirk started where they want to have more babies. He said, have more babies than you can afford. He said and he basically completely devalued women who don't have children. Even if you can't have children, he just completely devalued anyone who wasn't married straight and the way that he thought it should be, right? The rigidity within that it leaves zero space. That is not where God resides for me, right? That's where God resided for him. And I'm not going to take that away from him or from the people who would call that traditional value, right? They would call that, we want traditional values. Had a conversation with somebody yesterday who was actually pretty non-biased, actually, and was talking about the homeless problem and renting. And on one hand, I will give money to the homeless on the streets when they're outside of my shop. And then on the other hand, it deters people from coming into my shop. And if I call people, they say they can't pick them up because the activists want them to live everywhere. So there are these there's no boundaries for which people feel that they can have balance. The justice card comes to mind. We don't have balance right now because we're sorting through so much of the stuff. But when you were talking about George Floyd, it reminded me of all the videos I've seen of Kirk who often, all very often, at college campuses with a lot of white kids and very few people of color in the crowds, which I think is a little dangerous too in a lot of ways, but he would often talk about Black men not being good fathers at the exact same time denying that he's racist and denying white privilege and denying the fact that their ancestors in America were brutalized and enslaved. Their women were raped. And James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni have one of the most beautiful conversations, if you haven't seen it, where she says, "Why can't you fake it with me?" James Baldwin expresses to her, she's a Black woman, he's a Black man, and they're talking about the dynamics between men and women within the Black community. Now, obviously, he was gay, but they're talking about the family system that within what happened being what it is to be Black in America. And also, as a non-Black person, which Charlie Kirk was, who is, when a Black person would literally come to him and say what you just said is racist, he says, "I'm not racist." And he's like, he didn't even take pause to take a minute to say, to really listen to, if somebody is telling you that that's their experience, do you have the right to deny them that? And I think he lived in deny. And that was a big part of his whole power trip, was the denial. He will use the denial on whatever he doesn't like. But I think he also is missing out on so much there, because there were other times where he seemed more open. There were times where he would talk to people where he was more open, and there were other times where he was more closed. But in this particular case, he was very closed. And the conversation between James Baldwin and Nikki Giovanni is one of my favorites, because James Baldwin is talking about, "I take it from the white man all day long, so when I get home, I'm tired, I'm this, I'm that." And she says, "Now I, the Black woman who's in your home, you come home." And he says, "I have to fake it." Well, James Baldwin said, "I have to fake it with the white man. I have to fake it with the white boss, the white driver, the white person in the grocery store. And when I come home, I can't fake it." And she says, "Why can't you fake it with me?" And he says, "What?" And she says, "Why?" And I'm sorry, I'm not doing this accurately, but this is the gist of it. But she says, "Why can't you fake it with me? Why do I get all of the brunt of what happened to you with the white men all day long?" So that's just like one small example that I don't think Kirk would even take the time to slow down to acknowledge, because he's never experienced it, which is always why every time I watched one of his videos, I wanted to say, Charlie Kirk, I wish somebody would have asked him, what adversity have you experienced in your life? Because I know there's something that changed him. And I think he could have had a gay experience and been very afraid of that. And something like that, like something could have happened to him in his life where he has realized like he really wants to put guardrails around traditional family values to protect everyone. Because telling men to not watch porn and to not drink and to engage with their loved ones, there's not like horrible things coming out of it. A lot of the Black community, Christian community would say the same thing. It's just his denial of everything else, and it doesn't balance out, right? Like, so if you're saying, well, the Black men in America need to be healed, but they didn't have it any worse than white men, that's just like that denial and the cherry picking that we're talking about. And I'll wrap it up. But I'm obsessed with Chef's Table, not because it's not about food. It's about food, but it's about chefs having basically failed multiple times. And then in the 11th hour, they're going to give up. They're going to lose everything. And they have some creative inspiration, come up with this signature dish. And now they're famous, or their family, their food isn't represented in America. And so they literally come as immigrants with literally fucking nothing, but nothing. And they create a Cambodian restaurant and introduce their food to America. And these people are incredible, and they've all failed, and they've all had nothing but adversity. And their adversity is what made them genius, is what made them famous. For example, there's a Korean chef who is a famous pizza chef in Minneapolis. A Korean woman in Minneapolis is one of the renowned pizza chefs. And this woman, who's had Korean parents who did not speak English, moved to Minneapolis, they were the only Asian family in the community. She went to school with a bento box, right? I mean, literally, her grandmother made her own kimchi. Do you know how amazing that would be? How healthy that is? How beautiful that is? The ancient food in this bento box am I saying it right? Bento box. And she brought this ancient, we would die for, right, in today's society,
food to school and got made fun of. She threw it out. She denied who she was. And then later on, now she has a pizza made with kimchi, with her homemade kimchi, and has found a way to, she's assimilated into the culture, of course, but she was able to recapture herself. And it's like, I just feel like this traditional way of living, denounces culture. It denounces the beauty. And if you don't have a certain type of adversity, you're really missing out.
Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Is that too all over the place?
Yes. And I also think it goes both ways, too. So I don't want to cut you off. Are you?
No, please. I'm totally done.
Yeah. I suddenly, when you were speaking, I suddenly had this kind of like impulse to bring in where I saw Charlie, and not just Charlie, but like the conservative movement filling a need that I think is very real. And so I want to speak to that because it's sort of almost like I love what you're saying, actually. And I want to bring in the other side of the pendulum of let's also not totally skip out on the gift of like, well, I guess what we're calling traditionalism. Maybe there's a better word for it, but it reminds me, sorry, I'm feeling so much during this podcast. So you guys have to bear with me, but it reminds me, one of the videos, so I mean, you know, I'm sure you're aware, there's people on the right love to pass around these videos proving that Charlie Kirk wasn't actually homophobic and wasn't actually racist. And I watch these videos and I'm like, are we watching the same fucking video? Because these videos are so problematic. But one of these videos that I'm sure a lot of people have seen, again, that people keep posting as an example of Charlie Kirk being great with gay people, is this, you know, one of his college events where he's, you know, talking to people 10 years younger than him. And this young man approaches the microphone and basically says, you know, I'm a gay conservative. And essentially, like, what do you say to someone like me? Which, you know, to me, it was very clear what this guy was saying. Like, what I really heard this guy saying was like, where do I belong in all of this? And I think what he was really saying was like, do you accept me? And okay, I'll get into the critique first, but then I'll get into like what I think the possible gift of what I feel like Charlie Kirk was like offering certain people. You know, Charlie Kirk, you know, in what we might call is often his typical way, just immediately starts mansplaining to him. He's like, first of all, I would recommend that you don't have to like introduce yourself as I'm a gay conservative, which again, and this is where I'm going to get into like what I think the conservative movement can offer gay people. And I actually like really relate to this. I understand the notion of you are more than your sexuality. And I'm going to get into that in a moment because actually he says that in this video. But I want to point out before we get into that was the point of the fucking question, Charlie. This wasn't like this guy standing up and saying, I'm a gay conservative. Now let me ask you about the economy. He was specifically asking a question about where he fits in as a gay conservative. So yes, actually, in this instance, his sexuality was like very integral to the question. Now, I think Charlie Kirk couldn't take that in because, you know, trigger warning for anyone out there, that's his straight privilege. He doesn't know what it's like to not be straight and to walk into a room, especially a room of conservatives, and to sit there and ask myself, am I going to be accepted? Do I belong? Are people going to hate me? Am I going to get the shit kicked out of me? You know what I mean? Like, he doesn't understand that. He doesn't, I mean, by the way, you guys, like, I mean, I feel like I don't even need to explain this. This is something you know, as someone who grew up, like, I don't even know what I grew up in the 90s, I guess. I still live with this to this day. Like, it's, you know, for people who want to say, well, it's 2025 and it's different. Yes, that is true. That is completely true. And I want to say, as someone who wasn't young in 2025, to this day, I carry the lens of, I got to get this information out there at some point because I don't know where this person stands. And I have no idea, like, you know, whether they're going to have discomfort with this or not. You know what I mean? So that lens, like, still exists, you know, in this day and age. Charlie Kirk has no understanding of that. So, you know, he cuts this guy off, mansplain. And I felt so bad for this kid. So, okay, let me get into like what I think Charlie Kirk could offer something like this, because I felt so bad for this kid because I saw such a deep vulnerability in him. And you know, as soon as Charlie Kirk said, like, I would recommend that you don't need to lead with like your sexuality, the kid's like, no, I know, I don't want to be known just as that. You know what I mean? It's like, you just felt like his desire for approval, and it broke my heart for him. But, the reason why I'm saying all this is I totally understand, like, the viewpoint of someone who wants to be known for something other than their sexuality. And, like, I'll just speak personally. It's like, and this is where I feel like we get into the pendulum of, like, when things go so far afield, like, I'll just say, like, from my experience, again, growing up in a certain time, I understand not identifying with the way the left defines, like, the conversation around sexuality. You know what I mean? Like, I understand not identifying with the way that, like, for example, the gay community is defined in the world, or just the way, like, the conversation about, like, gay identity is held in the world. Like, I grew up in a time where, like, Will and Grace was, like, a huge breakthrough. And I get it. It was a breakthrough. And that's what they could do at the time. I get it. I'm not trying to take away from that. I really am not. I get, like, we owe so much of, like, today's equality and breakthroughs to things like Will and Grace. Like, so I'm not denigrating that, but I also want to speak to the young man that I was at that time who watched that show and was like, I do not identify with any of this. I do not identify with Will. I mean, Jack was very funny, but I didn't identify with him. I don't want, like, a codependent friendship with the Grace. Like, and I remember, actually, if I'm being totally honest, when I was going to be roommates with my first roommate, like my best friend, who I'm still very good friends with to this day, and we were going to be roommates, her father, who's a lovely guy, obviously didn't know what he was saying, but he was like, oh, you guys going to be like Will and Grace? You know what I mean? And, like, I was told in my early 20s, like, repeatedly by people, like, you're the worst gay person, like, I've ever known, because they wanted me to be a certain way. And there were demands on me from the gay. I mean, this could be a much deeper conversation where even just the labels gay, straight, and bi, I'm so uncomfortable with, because it's like, if you're a man who's attracted to men, that immediately gets translated as gay. And again, this is changing now, but when I grew up, gay meant something very specific. And it meant you were supposed to show up in the community in a certain way, and then the world thought of you in a certain way. And I remember, for me, just being like, I don't relate to any of this. I feel so missed in all of this. And, for me, speaking personally, to me, sexuality actually, like, this is where I resonate in some ways with conservatives. Like, I don't want to talk about it. Like, this is private to me, and it's sacred, and it's spiritual. For me, I'm saying for me, I don't want to make this a talking head issue. I don't want to make this a political issue. I get it. If that's you, awesome. And I really mean that. Like, and those are the trailblazers. And I really want to say that this is not me disrespecting those loud voices, because they have been necessary. I get that. I'm just saying, though, like you talked about, every spoke on the wheel, every person in the village has their place. For me, this is not my place in the village. And I felt so unseen and so misheard and so misunderstood. And it was so painful for me. So I'm saying all this because I understand the voice that says, wait, the left side of things is defining this in a way I don't relate to. And if I don't relate to it, I get made wrong. And I want to be who I am. And I want to be more than my sexuality. So I get it. Like, I get someone going to the right and saying, wait, is there a space here for me? Like, this other side's going so far with things. I don't resonate. There's something in me. Like I said, I'm a guy who walks into a church and feels God's grace. Like, I'm a guy, and I want to be clear, like, again, because again, I know people get triggered. I'm not saying you can't be like, whatever, like in the like stereotypical gay community or the gay community at large and not be Christian. I know that there's an overlap there. But again, I'm just sort of speaking to, like, there's complexity here, right? And there's something powerful in the voice of someone like Charlie Kirk saying you are more than your sexuality, right? But also, this is where context matters, right? In the words of Charlie Kirk, because he did say to this young man, you are more than your sexuality. So I understand why some people on the right might be passing this. And he says, you're welcome here. I don't care what you do in your bedroom. You're more than your sexuality. And so people on the right are like, see how he dealt with this guy? This was so great. Context matters here, because I do know that Charlie Kirk was a big believer in love the sinner, hate the sin. And for him, I mean, he literally talked about this, like in another video that when, people are passing around as proof of like how open-minded he is towards gay people, he literally talked about, well, Christ spoke with everyone. He spoke with the prostitutes, which, let's be clear, historically, this is nothing against modern day sex workers. Historically, prostitutes, that's the degenerates of society. So basically what he was saying in that clip, he was comparing gay people to the degenerates of society and, saying from his, in my mind, high horse, it's Christ-like to go and talk to them. You're sinning. You're a degenerate, but yeah, I'll talk to you, especially if you're willing to donate money to the conservative movement, especially if you're going to vote our way, because that's a lot of what he said. There's another video where he took on like a really kind of anti-gay extremist. Again, this is a video that people are passing around as proof of his open-mindedness. And basically his point was just like, oh, are you going to turn down their money? Are you going to turn down their vote for the cause? Like, love the sin or hate the sin. It works for the movement. It's very it felt very utilitarian for me. But the reason why I'm saying all this is context matters. So I'm going to say two different sentences to you right now. One is, I love the sin or hate the sin. You're fundamentally a sinner. I don't want to hear about your sexuality. I don't want to hear about it because it's a sin. You are ungodly in that respect. But I'll talk to you and I'll include you as long as you don't talk about this out loud and you are more than your sexuality. Versus you are a child of God. You are no better or worse than me. I am no better or worse than you. God loves you. We are all God's children. I accept you for who you are, and you are more than your sexuality. These are two very different statements because, in the words of Charlie Kirk, context matters. So, sorry, I'm saying so much at once. I guess to come back to what you were saying, what I love about what you were saying is reclaiming, right? Reclaiming the diversity and fusing it, with the struggle, which I think that's also like our soul journeys. Like we come in these lives to be tested and challenged, and we come in with our native essence. If you're Charlie Kirk, you come in with a native essence of like this powerful catalyzer who's like connected to founding principles of religion and like nation, right? But then we go through things that get us, like we go through adversity, to use your language. We get defended, we get wounded, we forget our native selves. We develop these like survival strategies. But the soul journey is we get to go back and reclaim our native self and integrate it with what we learned through adversity to become who we were meant to be. So in your example, I just love the idea. Did you say she was Korean, that chef? Like, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Like, she went through adversity where her culture was minimized. And then she assimilates, but then she gets to go back and reclaim her culture. And like that to me is the spirit of America, right? So I guess what I'm saying is let's also hold space for, and I guess this is why I went on this tangent. I think there can be something really beautiful. I hate these words because they feel, I don't know if they're the right words, but it's what's being called the conservative movement. It's what's being called traditionalism. It's like, I think for me though, it's just, if we remove those words, it's like a return to something that is maybe, again, I'm being so careful of the language I want to use because this is, look, guys, I'm speaking from my perspective. So I understand people are going to experience it differently. But for me, a return to maybe something more foundational and subtler than identity politics. And, I think there's something really beautiful about that. And I get that it got distorted into oppression and fear-mongering and othering and us versus them. But kind of like what we're talking, and this is the last thing I want to say because you keep bringing in how people like compare Kirk and others to Jesus, and there's the Messiah complex because he was persecuted. But I think they're missing the point. Jesus wasn't persecuted for waging a war. He wasn't waging a war. He wasn't fear-mongering. He wasn't creating dividing lines between people. That's not what Jesus was doing. He was embodying unconditional love and compassion for everyone. And that's why he was persecuted. And guess what? In his persecution,
They might disagree with you. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, that's how I see it.
Well, no, they might disagree in the sense that Jesus was also righteous and said hypocrites, and was stern and there was a divide, right? There was a divide, but I don't think his intention was to divide. His intention was what you're saying. It's the opposite.
Right, exactly.
But this is where they get into the crux of their own mind if they think that they are embodying that opposite as well. They think that they are embodying unity. And Kirk would at times be like, to tell a child that's black that he's going to deal with racism for the rest of his life. Charlie Kirk said a couple, like, that's like making him less than already. So there were certain times where he would like crack open a little bit. And some of the people that are a little bit more open-minded would say, like, you don't get it. Like, we're free thinkers. We're free critical thinkers, where we're independent from like the confines of like the left wokeism, and your wokeism is ruining it and creating more of a divide. And now, which sometimes it does, right? Like the labels and everything can, for sure. But like within the context of this whole Jesus stuff, where it's coming down to the lines of like, if I'm telling you you're a Black person and he wants to deny racism existed in order for that person to be free, and you can't have both.
Yeah, but what I would also say to complete the thought is, like, even when at the height of Christ's persecution, where he's being crucified, what did he do? He moved into the spirit of forgiveness.
Right.
And he moved into the spirit of compassion, which is just so different than the war that's being waged. And I think that's sort of like the point of why I went on this whole kind of like journey. Like one of the things, like going to sort of back to my personal experience and sort of understanding like what this young man may have been really sort of getting from the conservative movement. Like I remember, and in some ways I was blessed to have been in like a lot of all boys environments. Like I went to an all boys camp. I went to an all boys school. And yes, like it was difficult because I was, made fun of and othered and picked on a lot. But I also had very strong friendships with straight men. And I remember growing up actually feeling like in a lot of ways, and again, I'm speaking, extremes now. Obviously, there were nuances and exceptions along the way. But like, I remember growing up feeling the most accepted and not judged by like my straight male friends, because it was just this feeling like you have no demands on me. You genuinely don't care about who I am other than who I am. Not in a Charlie Kirk way of we're like ignoring it. It's just that we genuinely see you as a complete person and we accept all of you. And that to me felt like some of the most foundational, beautiful love that I ever experienced. And so I guess I'm just saying that because I understand that desire to reclaim something from like what we might call like radical left political identity. And again, I do want to be clear. I'm not dismissing the entire conversation of sexuality around that. I'm not wiping it out. But I am speaking to a very specific experience. But that's also why, at the same time, I found someone like Charlie Kirk so dangerous, because I felt like there's something he's offering someone like this young man potentially that's so powerful and so deep and so desired by certain people. But then he's funneling it through this particular brand of Christian conservatism that I think reinforces very quietly homophobia, shame, and stigma. And, so I'm saying two things at once, which is, again, just kind of like piggybacking onto the point you made.
That's the point.
Yeah, exactly. But the point you made about like reclaiming diversity for full integration, I also think there's something about reclaiming something like foundation. I don't know what to call it, but like kind of like a quieter foundational view of life for the sake of integration. And this is the fusion that wants to happen. I guess coming back to your question way back, it's just a question of how. But I just wanted to name it.
Well, I will just say that throughout this whole conversation, I'm blown away by the fact that it's a revolution, because people aren't having this conversation. People that agree with each other aren't having these conversations because everybody gets so exhausted. That's one thing I've really noticed. Everyone is so exhausted. They are spiritually exhausted. One of the things Charlie Kirk did say that I want to give him credit for is he said to somebody, and I can't remember what video it was, he said, the minute we start talking, we stop talking. Because he was talking to a feminist that I could tell he actually had respect for her. The way he was talking to her was he was talking to her in a subservient manner. He, for whatever reason, respected her as a feminist. And he said, we have to have these conversations, because if we don't have these conversations, we lose connection. Now, I can't speak to the other times where he literally says in a podcast, his words said, it would make me have a great day if I saw a convict get his head chopped. So he was saying that he wanted public execution. They were even saying they thought children should see it so that there's fear instilled and that you don't become a criminal, yada, 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 right? So these are opposing things that are happening. But then he goes and says that if we don't have these conversations, we lose connection. That's a true thing, right? If we can't have conversations with people in general, and see, like, when you said that about public execution, it makes my skin crawl. But when you said that about connection, I'm with you. Is there a way that we can coexist? So we don't have to agree, but can we coexist? If we don't, will the divide continue to grow? I don't know where we go forward if we don't have these types of conversations. And you and I both had fear and resistance around having this kind of conversation. And that's exactly why we have to have it, because I'm afraid to have it, because I'm afraid that I'm going to piss people off. And I'm afraid that I will be rejected from society and all of that stuff if I have a point of view. And while we're talking about free speech left and right, none of us feel free within our own ideas, because none of us know how to listen to ourselves, let alone others.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's what I'm so drawn to. It's like what I come back to as I hear you talk about Charlie Kirk. And this is why I read the thing about the influencer. It's like this notion of the blind spot, you know, because I agree with you. Like when you talk about the way that he spoke to the feminists and what he said to her, it's interesting. In that debate with Brianna Joy Gray, she says to him, again, this is like in the first 10 minutes because he keeps cutting her off. So hard to listen to. She says to him at one point, she's like, Charlie, I thought we agreed beforehand this wasn't going to be pugilistic. And he was like, yeah, well, no. When she said that, that really stood out to me. And this is like pure intuition, Molly. Obviously, I have no way of like confirming this or not. But I got this sense when she said that of, was Charlie Kirk someone who kind of had like a real public persona and then like behind the scenes may have been different? You know, not that, I mean, I feel like he believed everything he said he believed, but like, I really kind of felt that possibility of that split in him. And I guess I'm just bringing that up because, you know, you mentioned what he said to that feminist about like, we kind of have to have these conversations. And when I hear you say that, I can feel the part of him that believed that, right? But this is why, again, and coming back to that influencer, I'm bringing this up, and this is why I wanted to do this podcast. And this is what relates so much to what we talked about with Orange County. It's like that these are blind spots. And they're called blind spots for a reason. It's like that Charlie Kirk, for example, could potentially really believe in what he was saying, could truly believe that he was someone who was open to these conversations. And I'm going out to these colleges and I'm having these debates. And, you know, again, I see the flaw in it. I see the way that he shuts people down. And I mean, even the whole college tour thing, to me, it's a little strange that he's debating. I mean, I guess he did have debates with like Brianna Joy Gray and, you know, he would also have them with adults and contemporaries and peers. But I was also like, it's a little weird that he's like having these debates with like, I mean, I taught college for 5 years. Like I know college kids. I personally wouldn't go in like a head-to-head debate with a college kid. It just feels like the power imbalance feels a little wonky to me. But you know, that he could really believe in what he was doing and not see how he was feeding into the problem. Just like that fitness influencer. The reason why I read that is he truly believes in his righteousness. Truly. I saw another post he made before I did finally unfollow him. But I saw another post he made where he was like the caption was like, there is a spiritual war in this country. You know, and I'm sure it's him framing a spiritual war and how he's on the right side of it. You know, and for my mind, I'm just the very notion of like doing a spiritual post on a spiritual war. It's kind of like, guys, like, we have to surrender like the right side. But I think this is so important because that's what I'm saying. We have to bring this back to ourselves. We have to bring this back to ourselves. It's like, where is my blind spot? You know what I mean? Like, what if I'm in a position of righteousness, blame, finger pointing, the blind spot? And I think just for me, a start is just to acknowledge our capacity for it. And I think just to like look at this influencer, you know, who I'm sort of holding out there as an example, you know, I'm like tisking him. There's my self-righteousness. You know what I mean? But like truly, but like, that's what I'm saying. Like, I'm willing to direct that back at myself. And by the way, part of this is I'm not wiping out this guy's humanity.
No, you're not.
You know, like I get where I think he's coming from. I understand it. And believe me, I experience it. I have my moments like I'm saying, of righteous rage, you know? And I have my moments where I'm like, yeah, you know what I mean? Like, fuck you, you know? It's like, but it's like the difference between witnessing it, seeing it, acknowledging it. It's like I said at the top, and then can I be with that and go deeper with it and understand like this is part of my humanity, you know? So I think just even the willingness to just shift out of it's them, it's them, it's them to, oh, wait, it's them. So how might this be me? Because again, going back to Orange County, it's like, Katie, you're doing it. Katie, you're doing it. Katie, you're doing it. But it's like, we can all see, Gretchen, you're doing it. Emily, you're doing it. You know what I mean? Like, Gina, you're doing it. It's like, this is what I'm saying. The blind spot's called a blind spot for a fucking reason. You're blind to it.
Yes, yes.
And we see what Emily Simpson's doing on Orange County. Finger pointing, rage, rage, rage.
Oh, yeah. Totally, totally.
When you're in that finger pointing range, and if you're like pointing that self-righteous finger and making everyone else the problem, maybe this is your moment. Yes, have your boundaries and what you stand for and take the action you want to take, but to also look at, wait a second, if they have a blind spot, where's mine? You know, so I think that's like a huge thing. And then I think the other thing that I really bring into this, just sort of hearkening back to like a while ago, is I think what you brought in so beautifully is like, can we just slow the fuck down? And, you know, even before racing to like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? Just sit with the complexity within ourselves, sit with the complexity of this moment, sit with the complexity of others. It's like we were saying, it's like there was no, and again, I got this from the Lecrae podcast. It's like, you know, we moved so fast, we didn't even really get to mourn.
Yeah.
And this is like the last point I'll make, like bringing this back to Orange County, right? And the Real Housewives. It's like, I think so much about Tamara. She's so interesting because what I always see in her is like, this, we're talking about a pendulum. You know, it swings right, it swings left. It swings right, it swings left. And like, almost like with Tamara, what I see is like, I bury my truth and I get in a codependent relationship and I silence myself and I kiss ass. And, you know, I try to kiss Shannon's ass, even though deep down I have like tons of issues with her. I squash myself and then the pendulum swings in the other direction. And I scream and I rage and I yell. And then I get in trouble for it. And then I feel ashamed. So then the pendulum swings in the other direction where I bury my truth. And my question for Tamara is always, what would it mean for you to wield your truth, not from a place of wild rage, but from a place of heart-centered calm, where you just look at the other person and you're not trying to take them down, you're not trying to expose them, you're not trying to prove a point, you're just delivering your truth. And you let the chips fall where they may. And it's so interesting because what I always feel with Tamara is that that's like the space is threatening for her. And I'm bringing this back because, like, again, I feel like this is like energetically what we're talking about. There's something about like, and this is where I go back to the origins of our country. It's like, there's something about the space of like, and you said it. Hey, you expressed something. This is how this statement impacted me. This is how that statement impacted me. Can we both just sit here with this without needing to arrive somewhere? There's something about the space of just sitting with stuff, taking things in, feeling it. I think like for all of us, generationally, karmically, in our DNA, there's something in us that's like, it's not safe. That's where something gets taken from me. That's where I get stomped out. That's where my rights get taken away. I said this on Instagram. I'll say it here. I just feel so much fear underneath all of this. And so from an energetic level, like I was saying up top, like I exercise my energetic sovereignty even when the world is moving fast. So maybe there's just, you know, from the place of like manifestation, everything starts with our relationship to ourselves. You know, so can we just even, you know, as a collective, just start to slow down, not need to race to like pick up our phone, have a viewpoint, have an opinion, get our point across. and just start to take
Yeah.
things in. I mean, I'm aware, I'm even in saying this, I'm kind of putting a button on things, which kind of almost like I can feel how even like putting a button on things kind of like starts to suffocate it a little bit. But, you know, it's like, I don't know, but I also feel like it's an important point. It's just like, I think there is kind of a call to finally slow down, to be in the space and to kind of like catch our collective fight or flight, tribalistic us versus them fear, to like catch it up a bit to where we actually are and, you know, see what happens. Like, I don't know. That's the invitation to me. And like, that's what I feel, or it's part of the invitation. That's what I feel like, again, you know, because you brought this up. Well, you sort of mentioned like how people's response to Charlie Kirk's death in so many ways mirrors how he responded to things. I mean, guys, to the
You
point
said
that
yeah.
Charlie Kirk literally said George Floyd didn't deserve to die, but he was a scumbag. I mean, that's literally what he said. It's literally what he
Right.
said. That's what people on the left are saying. And then the right's getting real, how can you say that? But, you know, Charlie Kirk said this shit. But again, it doesn't make it right or wrong. But my point is, I do think what we're watching now is a reflection of his field. So if we're meant to learn something from his field, it is about how I think fundamental principles can get distorted where we have blind spots. I think it is about blind spots. And I think it is about the willingness to fucking slow down, drop into our hearts, and actually be the feeling change that we seek to embody in the world.
As you're speaking, the word nature keeps coming to me. And then I was thinking about, I just think that was just and I love that we don't want to come to a completion here. That's not the goal. And I was just had a Native American wisdom of like following the rhythm of your own soul and following your own energetic signature is like, it is against the grain typically, and it will probably go against the indoctrinated ways of society. But like, that's why Native American culture, which we completely abolished, really respected nature. Because I was thinking, Jesus talks about it too, but I really just getting back to understanding like the actual earth in which we live in just really was like something I needed to say as you were talking about being present, being with what happened. And if you don't want to grieve Charlie's death, you'd certainly, if you really were to slow down and go within, you certainly would be concerned about the amount of just any political. I mean, it is really like what happened to Gretchen, right? The Democrat in Minnesota. Am I correct on that?
I don't know her name, but yeah.
I mean, it's scary. I think it's hard for people to admit when they're scared. And so you just go straight to anger because anger feels more powerful than the powerlessness of being scared. But yeah, just this idea that like we can't even look at things for 5 seconds from our hearts without jumping to the information era and the productivity era and like the content era, content. And that present time awareness of just sitting with things can be so painful and so scary. You were saying, as you were saying, like, I was like, can they do they want that? Do people want that? I don't know. I personally think everybody wants it. They just don't know that they want it because they aren't taught it. And we've lost those traditions. We've lost the tradition of stillness. We've lost it. And in that loss, there is chaos. And unsimilar to the chaos of nature that's perfect order, this is self-created. And from that chaos can come discovery and healing, but we have to start observing it in the macro rather than just our point of view. And yet again, who are we without our point of view? My best friend Nora said something the other day. I told her, and I'll stop with this because it's kind of going to your point. I said to her, I had sort of like an awakening over the weekend, and I was slowing down, and I said, you know what I want? I want a simple life. And she has been cultivating a simple life for 5 years now, I think. And a simple life to me means I get to do all my creative stuff, all that stuff, but it's just a simple life. That is what I crave right now. For some reason, I'm craving a simple life, and I'm excited about
I'm so excited about creating that for myself, and it's already started, and it's already here, and it feels so nurturing. And she goes, well, as somebody who has cultivated a simple life, it's a revolutionary act in this world today.
Yeah.
And once you live it, you realize all the things you think you need is like the opposite of what you actually need. And there's so much joy and substance in that. And maybe, Jamie, maybe Charlie Kirk was sort of speaking to some of that, but missing.
Oh, I thought you were like making that point.
Yes, I do think that the root of like the Christianity, at least the good parts that I saw from the nuns that I worked for, and so I did see a peace within them and a simple life that they were living. And these chefs that I watch on TV that I love so much that are building their own gardens and going back to the roots of who they were. We do have to sort of, like any hero's journey, we have to go off into the wilderness, into the chaos to find our way back.
Yeah, I mean, I actually thought, like, I loved what you were saying. I thought you were intentionally hearkening back to what I was saying, because I actually love the language you're bringing in of, like, you know, what gets called, what was it? Like, it gets called traditional. It gets called, like, conservative. But, like, I love simple. There was another word you just brought in too that I don't remember now, but like we could start with simple. Simple, quiet. Quiet is another one, because it's true. And, you know, I was just thinking about, like, this is kind of like, I'm talking about the pendulum. This is the arc of life, right? Things get so fucking loud. And this is what I'm talking about with Tamara. It's like, this is what happens, right? Like, people have issues with Gay Pride Month. Well, why do you need Gay Pride Month? Well, I'll tell you why we need Gay Pride Month. And by the way, again, I am speaking as someone who I don't even participate in it, because that's not me. It doesn't speak to my soul. But I'm going to tell you, because I'm willing to hold space for the complexity of everything. Gay Pride Month is necessary because guess fucking what? Gay people were oppressed for centuries and, you know, decades and centuries, and they were killed for it, and they were silenced. So what happens when you push something down? It comes roaring back up, which, by the way, people on the right should understand, because that's essentially what Charlie Kirk was doing. We're getting pushed down, so I'm coming roaring back up. You push people down, they come roaring back up. That is the way it works. The reason why we don't have straight Pride Month is because straight people were never fucking oppressed. They don't need it to come roaring back up. If gay people had been given a place at the table from the beginning of time, guess what? There'd be no fucking Gay Pride Month. I mean, I'm getting heated about it because it's the ultimate in gaslighting, right? But it's like, the reason I'm saying this, though, to come back to what you were saying, it's like the pendulum swings in the other direction. The voice gets loud. And then there are people like me who come along and are like, okay, like, I honor and respect the volume of that voice. I understand why it's necessary. And now I kind of want to bring the pendulum back into the middle, because that's actually not me. And there's stuff over here about the simple life and the quiet that actually really speaks to my soul. And I really want to return, now that we've found our place at the table, I want to come back to a more subtle, nuanced place where it's like, it doesn't have to be us versus them, gay versus straight. And again, I want to be clear, that's just me. I'm not saying it needs to be that way for everyone. And this is the difference between Charlie Kirk and me. I don't have an us versus that. All I'm saying is, let me be me. Don't put your demands on me. Don't tell me I'm bad or wrong, because I don't want to participate in this. I love what you're doing for you. Let me be me, and let's coexist. You know what I mean? And so it's like, yeah, I don't know if I've lost the plot, but like, I just loved what you just said, though, because it is what I'm speaking to, where it's like, oh, and I think, yeah, to the potential power of some of what Charlie Kirk was bringing in. It's like, you know, what I hear him saying and what I hear a lot of conservatives saying is the voices have gotten really loud. And, you know, and yes, I think, as we all know, the left, in its increasing volume, the pendulum can start to swing to that other direction where it's like, it's our way or the highway. And if you have a question about it or you want to challenge it, you're fucking out and you're getting canceled. You know, which is why I think, you know, I don't want to speak for you. I think both of us, like, we're scared of the right and we're scared of the left. You know, this is not like, I'm scared of everyone's cancel culture at this point. Because it's like, if you don't fucking do and say the right thing and use the right language, like, you're out, you know, which again, it's like,
it is. And yes,
your humanity just gets wiped out. Your good intentions gets wiped out. It's painful. I already experienced this a little bit on Instagram. I posted like a little bit about Charlie Kirk. And I want to say like 95% of what came back to me from both people on the right and the left was beautiful. But there was that 5% of people just getting triggered and policing my language and insulting me and mocking me. And I'm just like, it's like, again, it's painful. Like, don't wipe me out. Like, you're for a guy who allegedly stood for civil disagreement, and yet you're wiping me out right now. So anyways, there's a lot here, but yeah, it's like, I just love what you said about like really framing this as like, for some of us, a desire to return to something simpler, a desire to return to something quieter, a desire to return to someplace that does fall more in the middle. I feel like the pendulum has been swinging wildly, and I think that is part of the invitation here. And can we just coexist with everyone on all points of the spectrum? And, you know, the last thing I'll just say, just to kind of like really, you know, speak to what you brought in is like, you know, I really understand you. I mean, that's why I'm now, I'm, you know, I'm living on the land now. And I do want to say, as someone who's kind of like cocooned up in the high desert, in the mountains of the high desert, I feel it. Like, I feel the pace the world is going at, and I feel how different it is from my pace. And it's both the hugest relief and also, I don't even know. It's like disorienting at times. Like, I want to say like my experience of life has changed so much. And just even on a personal level, in terms of like relating this to the collective, like I never would have guessed this is where I would have been 5 years ago. You know what I mean? I had no plans to like ditch LA. You know, like my life has changed so much. And I'm saying this because I feel like this is where we are at as a collective in terms of humanity, as a nation, in terms of humanity. It's like the wheels are fucking off right now and everything is changing, and I feel it. And this is why I wanted to do this podcast. The world is changing, and it's scary. You know, it's scary. And I agree with you. Like, that is what I've been feeling. It's the fear of where this is all going, the fear of the powerlessness, the fear of what this means. And let me try to grasp control through anger. But it's a false sense of control. It's a false sense of control. And I guess that's kind of what I'll end on. Like I said, I do think Charlie Kirk was this catalyst. And I do like watching the footage of his murder. It's both like horrifying and devastating. And from a more like from a macro soul perspective, when I watch it, part of me doesn't even know if I should say this. It's like, I like felt like, you know, because I think when people die, it's like their energy gets dispersed in some way. It's like energy doesn't die, you know? And it's almost like I felt him moving into some higher self mission, like that this murder wants to catalyze something, you know? And maybe, you know, depending on what you believe, like there are those who believe that certain events are predetermined from a soul level. Some things aren't predetermined. I don't know. I'm not answering that. Like I said, on a human level, it's devastating. It shouldn't have happened. I absolutely condemn it. On a soul spirit level, you know, I felt like something got opened in this, like a doorway got opened for the collective, you know, but we still have to use our free will to like walk through the door or not. You know, so are we going to, is like the question.
To their point, the martyrdom in a way that could be used for both sides or all sides or what have you. But no, it's just beautiful what you were just saying. And it made me think of the chef talking about only needing 4 ingredients. When I'm working on a song, we start producing my own stuff. And so I want to put every instrument on every song and then learning how to distill it down and take away is where you find refinement. But it's also when you start doing the deep listening of what is this message, or when you're writing a script or you're doing a scene, it's like when you're slowing things down, whatever medium that you're working in, even if it's literally going to a service job, which I also do, right? Where you go and you're just like, what is right in front of me? And it's so hard when we have a device. We have devices, right? Which device? When you're asked to join a new streaming service that says, which device do you have? Or you go on your Apple phone and that shows you your devices. When people talk about addiction and vices, they also say like devices, like a smoking or this, a device. And isn't that funny that we like live with a device almost as if it's normalized? We've normalized having information given to us all the time when we are not meant to have every ounce of everybody's information all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to create boundaries within ourselves. You said you don't look at the comment section, and I really heard that because I sometimes get into it like an idiot. And it's like it's me trying to heal my family system. But really, I have to get honest with myself. And I have to say, well, if I'm going to do it, then I have to do it from a place of service, or if I have to be intentional about it. But how do we find our boundaries while this information era? And by the way, the people running the things that we see all have a different motive and agenda.
Right.
And most of it's monetization.
Right.
Most of it's monetization. We are all being used.
Yeah.
And both sides know that. And we're all scared shitless, like you said. So yeah, I think it really is about, okay, we've got a lot of people with a lot of opinions. What do I think? What do I feel? And if I can't figure it out, how do I slow down and find out and get real quiet and maybe have to start saying no and setting up boundaries? And that's such a tall order because we're so programmed to follow.
Yeah.
So maybe Charlie Kirk's, one of the things he did was he believed in what he believed in and he went after it. Right. And there's an opportunity we don't have to agree with anyone. And I think he did cause harm. I really do. I think that he did in many ways cause harm and then maybe in other ways didn't. But I do think like there's still a lesson within his life because his life has value because we all have value. If we say we're truly want to be created equal, then we have to see everyone equally. And it's almost impossible to ask of certain people. Like I would never, as a white person, ask somebody who's like lived a life differently than I have to feel the way I feel about this particular situation. But this is the way that my heart and soul has to look at it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I'm right. It's just the way in which I think spiritually makes sense.
Yeah. And just, I think in the spirit of like slowness and simplicity, it's just even the fact that like, as you mentioned, we were supposed to record this last week and, both of us just were so still deep in the thick of feelings and didn't feel ready. And it's like, we made the choice to delay it, and it was the exact right move because I felt ready to record this week. And so I don't know. I just really, I like bringing in the minute examples because like these are the kinds of choices that we can make. It might sound small. I always have clients saying to me like, I know this is like a really small thing that I'm talking about. And I'm like, no. There is no such thing as a small thing because when this is what I'm always saying, when you're not lost in the weeds and you're dealing with situations as reflection of pattern, bigger picture pattern, it could be the smallest fucking thing in the world. And if you, to use Charlie Kirk's language, if you're really holding space for the larger context of it, the smallest micro choice can have the biggest macro implications. So if you are someone who wants to contribute to, let's just say, the collective willingness to slow down and to not indulge fight or flight race to get somewhere or to do something that's reinforcing division, any conscious choice you make to exercise your inner sovereignty and to exercise your inner slowness that's out of sync with the current rhythm of like the news cycle and the political cycle and everything that's going on, that choice matters. It matters. It absolutely matters. That's the beauty of spirit. It's like, it's not linear. None of this shit's linear. But that's also why, like, I'm going to be highly critical of what Charlie Kirk does. I'm not taking what he says for face value. I mean, I literally watched him get an audience riled up towards a young man asking a question. And you could feel it. The audience was like so excited for Charlie Kirk to take this young man down. It did seem like the young man was telling a tall tale, but he got the audience so excited to take this young man down. And then Charlie Kirk has the audacity to say, there's no hate here, only love. And I'm just sitting there like, I'm feeling the energy of this video and the people in this video, they are laughing at this guy. They are cheering you on, taking him down. There's no love. And then you look at the comments on the YouTube, they're all hateful comments. If it was truly a video of love, it would have been people who would have felt some sort of compassion or curiosity towards this young man and why he was lying, if in fact he was lying. But this is just to say, this is why I don't take Charlie Kirk's words at face value. I listen to the underlying energy, but the point being energy is everything. So it doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to be connecting the dots. Every single energetic choice we make has value and it contributes to the whole. So that's the beauty of all of this. We don't have to have the miraculous answer because it's not going to come from our minds. It's going to come from our feeling bodies and the energetic choices that we make. So that's why going back, and I guess this is what I'll conclude on, that moment that was so beautiful where you said it. It's like, I'm connecting with my love. And then I forget exactly what you said, but you were like, so what next? Or how do I do that? I was like, you're already doing it. Like, don't skip over that heart-based moment. It's everything. And then I would just say, let that lead the way, as you go about your life. But like, that's it, or it's part of it. So having said that, Molly, first of all, thank you so much for like everything that you brought today and that you always bring and going on this journey with me. Tell people where they can find you.
I guess Instagram's the easiest way. And it's at Molly Durand, MOLLYDURAND. You can find you can pretty much figure it out from my Instagram, unfortunately.
Okay, great. And as always, you can find me on Instagram, Jamie Stein, JAMIESTEIN. If you're curious about my work, you can send me an email through my website, hollywoodreadings.com, or you can click a link in the show notes. And that's it, you guys. We did it. And we will be back, presumably, to get back into the Housewives. Until then, yes to going slowly, yes to connecting with yourself, yes to sitting with complexity, yes to being open to blind spots in yourself and others, yes to our deeper unity, yes to respecting our differences, yes to coexisting, and yes to this invitation, whatever invitation has been opened up in this deep energetic portal of Charlie Kirk's murder. Yes to all of it. All right, you guys. See you on the flip side. Bye.